Attention. Attention. This is not a recording. This is actually me, George, right here on a show that's named for me. It seemed fitting when I sat down in the chair this morning. I wondered if they had changed the name in the short time that I was gone, but alas, no. It is still the George Brockler Show right here on 710 KNUS, and you are listening to me. If you have been monitoring my voice over the past couple of weeks, it has improved, but not back to 100%. Yes, I still have this lingering, persistent cough. I'm sharing with you, of course, the medical journey that I'm on. I picked this bug up when the boys and I were out in Orlando doing the amusement park circuit. It has crushed Dad harder than it crushed anybody else for a lot longer period of time. And at this point, I've taken more pills, steroids, stuff called Mucinex, bunch of other things that were supposed to help with the cough, to really no avail. But I'm working on it. And so from time to time, I'll hit the cough button. You won't know it, hopefully. And I'll continue to work on my range, too, because I still try to hit some of those Steve Perry notes from Journey. I'm just a little sketchy. It's just not me yet. So I'm not 100% back, but I do feel a lot better than 2 weeks ago when I came back. Now, I am in the saddle with you again. My thanks to Deb Flora, to Jimmy Sengenberger and John Caldera, who more than ably filled in for me over the last few days. If you'll recall, my last time with you on air was 1 week ago this morning. Then I got on a plane and I flew to a place called Amman, Jordan. And I'll talk to you more about that in a minute, but I want to update you on the things going on around you right now. Now, I have not been able to accumulate all the different weather prognostications over the past few days, as I'm wont to do. So we're kind of having to start anew. The meteorologists get a little bit off the hook here because I don't have anything to measure their mistakes against. So here it is, Thursday today. It says not as cold, 37 degrees. Tomorrow, we shoot up to 42, but then a steady progression downward through light snow and flurries Saturday and Sunday to Monday, where we hit, bam, a high of 10. And then Tuesday, 20. I mean, it's feeling wintry, and thank you for the texters already texting, and welcome back. You sound better. I feel better-ish, but I had the little coughing fits. So, listen, if you're going to do anything outside, it sounds like tomorrow's your best day over the next week. It's the only day that'll be north of 35 degrees after today. Everything else hovers between 10 and 28 over the next 4 or 5 days. But of course, as we know from our good buddy Lisa Hidalgo from Channel 7, they just make it up. After 3 days, they're really just inventing numbers and I think it's a dartboard, some sort of weather dartboard. We're going to try to continue to get those folks on. I think I reached out to the big fella from Fox 31 too. We're going to try to get him on as well. Now, Billy, I was gone for a few days. Did I miss anything? Did anything happen? It wasn't like I was in another part of the country and I was able to keep up. The only thing I could monitor from afar was football.
Yeah. We did change the name of the show is now the Mostly George Show.
It's, you know what? I like that.
Mostly. Yeah.
I like that. And it's accurate.
Yeah. And it works well on a t-shirt. So that works. Yeah. When you weren't here, oh man, it was difficult. You missed, I guess Monday. That was when they brought it and did the wine tasting. So you missed that.
Come on.
Tuesday.
Normally we do that in the parking lot.
I know. Tuesday it was the complimentary massages. That was nice that day.
No, listen, Billy, I don't know if you know this, but they're always complimentary from Mark. He never charges. It's a weird thing.
The weird one was the Wednesday thing. I mean, office proctology exams. I mean, I'm just saying it's a weird team building exercise.
Somebody read my memo. Thank you, Brian and Kelly, wherever you are, because I've been asking for that.
It's weird. It's especially, I mean, did we have to have themed G-strings? I'm not sure that was necessary.
Oh, wait.
No,
now I do feel like I missed something.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was really hopeful of, and I'm sorry I missed it because I'm missing a class ring from back in '88, and I thought that they might be able to.
They might be able to.
Don't know.
Yeah. Could be somewhere uncomfortable. So.
Doesn't sound like there was much news. It's not like there were any more new classified documents found or anything like that. No,
nothing happened. No, they actually said, well, George is out of town. Let's just stop doing everything. Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Even abroad, right? Like
absolutely. Yeah. Nobody decided to send tanks anywhere or nothing.
Even abroad, man, the news is everywhere. And of course, you still get your regular feed on your phone. And just this whole Mike Pence classified documents thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting around with some other officers who will remain nameless, and we've all been TSSCI cleared, skiff participants, all this stuff, just sitting around and thinking, what message does this send to every other DOD employee or military member who you beat to death if they simply leave their CAC card, their controlled access card, in their keyboard while they go get some water?
Yeah.
You crush them. And here are guys at the top levels of government who appear to be just like stuffing classified documents in amongst their religious texts and their, home and garden magazines.
Yeah. The thing I took away from it is, one, how about we change the system? I mean, I know that our federal government isn't necessarily so responsive, but if we have a system in place in which we have classified documents on multiple occasions at this point make their way outside of the White House and outside of the Senate, maybe we need to re-examine the system. And the fact that nobody's talking about that, I find very scary. I haven't heard a single lawmaker, I haven't heard a single person from the DOJ go, maybe we need to reevaluate how we're doing the stuff.
The problem that they have is that we're talking about guys that were at the upper level of the executive branch who sets the rules. So what do you tell those guys? I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, you're wrong. That's a tough talk.
I think that whoever's in charge of classified information gets to be in charge of classified information and say, no, this is how we deal with it. There's got to be some sort of a team or something that goes through everybody when they're leaving office, either Senate, House, White House, doesn't matter. We got to change that. That I think is very shocking. The other one that I think is weird is that you're talking about, all the implications for the Department of Justice and Department of Defense people that you work with. And I keep thinking about, I don't know, both our allies and our enemies and all of their spies that are out there. And basically, we have put up a giant red flag that said,
come find a politician.
Yeah. If you want to come find some secrets that we're keeping, perhaps you need to just start searching their closet. Maybe you need to just search their garage. And you don't think that there are organizations, both friendly to us and not friendly to us, that are arranging their own cleaning crews that will be planted in certain areas in order to gain access to these locations? You're high if you don't think that's happening right now.
Apparently, you can just dress up like an attractive Chinese woman and get Eric Swalwell to tell you just about anything
at all. Yeah, I keep thinking that, but in a sense, we don't even need the attractive, spy anymore. We just need someone that goes,
these are
housekeeping.
These are career-ending mistakes. Like they take your security clearance from you and escort you from the building. You receive some type of, at a minimum, general officer memorandum of reprimand that ends your career as an officer. And there's some other investigation to see if you're prosecutable. And yet at this point, it's just like, well,
here's the thing. It's just like,
old dudes.
It's just like Mel Brooks said in History of the World Part 1. It's good to be the king. And that's basically it, is the people
or the vice king.
Well, that's the thing is, when you talked about the idea that these are the people at the top levels that get to make the rules. Well, to them, there are no rules. The rules don't apply to them. Whatever rules they put in place, whatever rules everybody else has to play by, they don't have to. And so even when you argue, how do we do this and change the rules? Maybe we just make the people at the top play by the same rules. If we start there, maybe that's a good step one. But I just look at this and think, this is a nightmare. This is embarrassing. This makes us look like we are part of a clown show, that we're just like, of course, everybody gets to take home classified documents.
It feels like, too, that maybe there should be a pre-waiver. Like when you get sworn into office, you execute a waiver that says, I consent to the FBI searching my home upon my leaving office just to make sure that I haven't accidentally stuffed something in with my lunch. And left.
Why doesn't it happen now? Again,
I don't know.
That's the thing, is these people have access to classified documents. The fact that is shocking to me is that there is no
it's embarrassing.
Check before you walk out the door. I'm telling you,
it makes them look incompetent.
If I am fired today, they check all the stuff that I carry with me before I walk out the door. And I'm a schlub. It doesn't matter. But the people that have access to all the classified information, nobody checks what goes into the boxes there. Everybody's like, oh, it's the honor system. Really? Have you been paying attention to these people? I don't think honor is part of really their character a lot of the time. It doesn't matter the party.
What is some soldier who screws this thing up? What do they think when they're getting run out of the military or prosecuted? And they're like, but these guys, these guys, I made a mistake.
The lesson is instead of actually going and raising your hand and pledging your life and your means towards the country in order to serve and go around the world and protect our freedom. Instead, what you need to do is just raise your hand and join Congress, because then the rules don't matter. That's the rule.
It seems like that has become the norm.
It's the wrong location. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Sorry about that.
It's embarrassing.
Before we, of course, take it in through the remainder of the segment, and then we get to all the good stuff that I don't think you've been able to do.
No, I don't.
Since other folks have been in the saddle, and that is, of course, the Thorpe Report, and you choose the news.
Some of the other people don't get it. So
that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting to me that they don't get it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. I think that based on just the feedback from the texters, listeners do too. And folks, if you haven't been listening in a while, or you just need to be reminded, you communicate with me directly, right? Yeah. Like you get on that app, that 710 KNUS app or 710knus.com. You hit me with the text. I respond. I mean, everybody that's texted me this morning has gotten some kind of response from me. That's just how it goes. You can also call in when the time is right, or you're so moved, at 303-696-1971. But I love the text, man. I love to have that engagement. You guys are very good at it. So keep that up. Just to tell folks where I was, this wasn't some vacation or a boondoggle, and there's no knock on those things. I've definitely taken one of those things.
You didn't go to the Jordan Surfing Championships of the world? That wasn't
No, but I did get to do something cool. So first off, incredibly long flight, but mercifully, and I think this is a reflection of how important a partner they are in the region, there are several direct flights from Washington, D.C. to Amman, Jordan, and I was fortunate enough to get on one of those. It is a long flight. It is a 10-plus hour flight.
Yeah.
I was stuck in steerage. Listen, I don't have the money, and the government ain't going to spring for me to sit in like premium economy or Polaris, which I'd love, because then if you've ever flown that, it's like you're in your little cocoon. They're feeding you alcohol and food the whole trip. You lay down, you take a nap. You have like a big screen TV, all that stuff. No, I'm in steerage. If you can picture some kind of like stereotypical Mexican tour bus where there's like chickens in the back, like, and there's like flying across the aisles. There are kids playing with knives in the aisles, just like families have just abandoned it. They're like, well, I know they're not getting off the plane, so
we'll see what happens.
I'm going to get some shut eye. Yeah. So I had that very, very difficult to sleep, but I get there, and something cool is that usually these trips build in a little bit of cultural acclimation time, which is hugely helpful. Because you want to do more than hit the hotel and the military office that you're at and then leave there. If you're going to have this relationship developing thing, and I'll talk about what we did. But the first opportunity we had built into some time to go to a place called Petra. Petra is, you got to Google this place. It is freaking amazing. It dates back more than 2,000 years. And you've seen it before. You just don't know you've seen it. If you remember the end scene to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when he and Sean Connery, when Indiana Jones are riding off from the horse, they've just discovered, the Holy Grail, and he chose poorly, that whole thing. When they're riding away from these etched in, I don't know how to describe it, it's called the Treasury, on this sheer rock wall, that is Petra. That is part of this giant thing, this community that evolved there on a major trade route over 2,000 years ago. And the amount of effort, the detail, the technology that they didn't have and were able to do this, the irrigation stuff they did, it was incredible. It was freaking incredible. These folks in another part of the city, there's something called the Citadel, which sits on the top of this high hill. And they have archaeological dig things going on there that have found things that date back 7,000 years. Folks, that when you're in school learning about the dawn of Western civilization, and you're hearing about things like the Euphrates River and the Tigris and the Mesopotamian Valley, this is at that same time. That's what we're talking about here in Jordan. And so it was fascinating. It's also fascinating how they approach it. Here in America, if you find something that's 100 years old, they throw an air-sealed plastic box over it, and you can't get within 10 feet of it because, fragile. Out there, oh, no, man. Kids are climbing on top of rocks that the Romans put there, at the time of Christ. There's a little bit of garbage here, a little bit of people are having lunch on top of these things. It's just so much more accessible and part of the part of the world. There's a coliseum there in the middle of town that dates back 2,000 years, just surrounded by the rest of humanity. It was, it's so interesting. Arabic is the language of the day. There are something you don't really account on, by the way, here in the world, in America's world, is getting woken up in the wee hours of the morning to morning prayers. If you haven't heard that, I cannot do it justice. I don't want to disrespect it, but they have these towers everywhere, and they echo morning prayers. There are evening prayers. I imagine there's prayers during the day, but we're busy doing stuff. It was a fascinating place. A very, very nice and good people. They are in a very poor country. The inflation there has been crazy. Maybe one of the only countries worse off than them are their neighbors, probably Iraq and Lebanon. Lebanon is just a dumpster fire economically, but Jordan's doing okay. They still have a king, as you know. Did not get a chance to see him, as you can imagine. But the entire part of this mission was through an organization called the Defense Institute for International Legal Studies. And while those words alone make you think CIA front, I promise you it's not. It is an organization that's housed on the naval base there at Newport, Rhode Island, and they serve several pretty big functions. One, they host foreign officers there to help train them up on a whole bunch of areas of law, the law of war, Geneva Convention stuff, rules of engagement, all of those things to try to help our partners who we're going to give weapon systems to or aid to be better, to comply with the norms. And I know this is going to sound silly, but the norms of warfare across the world. That's one thing. The other thing they do is they do something called 333 missions, human rights missions. I've gone on several of these things, and you actually go to the foreign countries and you meet with the military leaders and other personnel who are going to be operating these systems. Hypothetically, let's say a Reaper drone system. And you go through the blocks of instruction that are focused on human rights law, on the Geneva Convention, on the use of force, rules of engagement, all of these things. And that is fascinating too. You learn a lot about who these folks are, and then they get to learn a lot about you too. And then the final thing is the thing I did this time. First time I've ever done it. It's called ICB, Institutional Capacity Building. This is the most important function that this organization serves. And this is a longer term, this is like a one and done training thing. In fact, the training piece of it is really secondary. They go out, develop relationships with these foreign militaries and help them to accomplish goals that put them in a place to be more autonomous and in many ways more modern in their approach to running the military and conducting war. So the example I would give you is the JAF, the Jordanian Armed Forces. Tremendous fighters. I mean, these guys are tremendous fighters, and they have a hell of a job because they border countries that aren't always their buddies, like, I don't know, Syria, right? They have a lot of Syrian refugees. They have people pouring across their borders. They have Saudi Arabia. They have Egypt. They nuzzle up next to Israel. I mean, they're just across the Jordan River from Israel. So they have pretty tall demands. And one of the things that they're trying to work on is to develop a system that trains and deploys operational lawyers for the purposes of providing the kind of guidance to commanders that make sure that the decisions that they make are compliant with international law, even their own local laws, those kinds of things. They just don't have anything like that. And so this was part of a process of developing the relationships with these major commanders and these players and these directorate heads, and then starting to put in place these exercises that will help develop these folks over a period of time. And this is going to require multiple trips out there, not necessarily from me, although I'd love to go back out there again. But the reason it's important that I went, and I want to tell you this, is that every National Guard in the country has at least one SPP, that's a state partner in the state partner program. And Colorado has two. One is the country of Slovenia, nestled right up there in the northern part of, right outside northern Italy. Not a lot going on there right now. And Jordan. Jordan is another major partner for the Colorado National Guard. So this wasn't just some, hey, this would be really cool to do. I'm going to go do this thing. This thing had value to the mission of our Guard, but also the Department of Defense as a whole. And it was fascinating. The pace was very interesting. I mean, there are times I could talk about this forever, but it's not like America where you show someone respect by not wasting their time. You go in there and you sit down and it's small talk city. And they have a guy that comes in and there's there's generals and colonels and stuff. And it's like, would you like chai or tea? Do you want milk in your chai? Multiple rounds of this. There are cookies. All of this is part of this cultural relationship building with these guys to get to a point. And I should say, very impressed with the JAF, very impressed with their leadership. These folks get it. They're committed. They're invested. And I think this is going to end up being a huge, huge success. But that's why I was gone for these days. Now, you lose a day at the front and weirdly, you get sort of it back in the back end. But man, folks, I left Amman, Jordan at 2 a.m. after some incredible screening, by the way. They are Israeli-like in their screening. It ain't like America where, your random color was drawn or you're good. Man, these dudes are hands-on. There's no like, may I have permission? They're like, stick your arms out. And then they are on you, buddy. They're like, in a pocket, no problem. Between your legs, it's happening. Get used to it. I mean, this is how these guys protect their country in a part of the world where that matters a lot more than it does here. And so 2 a.m. on, what was it, Wednesday morning or something, I flew out to land back here after a billion hours of travel to get back here at about 2 p.m. on the same day. It was something. So, what an incredible trip.
It sounds wonderful. My takeaway so far is that you went halfway around the world to have tea and cookies with a bunch of people, and then you got felt up by some people at the airport. That's my book report for your trip.
That is a good takeaway. And Billy, I actually brought something back for you, but I left it in the luggage because yesterday I fell apart.
That sounds like a euphemism I'm very uncomfortable with.
So, some of the food that they have there, folks, is ridiculous. It's incredible. There's a place that there's something called, I'm going to say it wrong, but it's a dessert that has like an angel hair topping and a white cheese filling that's very, very sweet. And there are different versions of it. It's called kanafa. And we went to a place that was known across the country, and it's a Syrian version of kanafa. And, buddy, I mean, you can, the smile you can't suppress, but you also know that you're dying while you eat it because it is so rich and so good. You're like, this is going to kill me eventually at some point. But it was incredible. And they make it in this, I don't know, the food that they have, they're very big on meat. They have a lot of meat, a lot of bread. Holy smokes, man. The kind of bread that they have, the hummus, the ridiculousness. And then one night we ended up going to some Yemeni place, completely different. And in a couple of these restaurants, buddy, they save a whole lot of money because you don't get plates. They throw a big old tablecloth, like a disposable tablecloth on top of the table. That be your plate. They pass around all these dishes and it's good luck. And it's just all hands, man.
Really?
I mean, yeah. If you want a spoon for the lentil soup, you can get one. But if you ask for things for other parts of the meal, they're like, you must not be from here. It was incredible. Anyway, it was a fascinating thing. I don't know that I'm going to have to go do this thing in the near future, but I imagine I'll go out there at least one or two more times over the course of the next couple of years. But fascinating training. But I'm back. I'm back with you full time, baby, except for tomorrow. Because
a liar,
as it turns out, when you're not just the radio guy, when you do things like practice law, some courts, and in particular this court across the state in a place called Montrose, doesn't care that I'm on the radio. They care that I have a case in front of them, and they've said they'd like me there at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Did you try the "Do you know who I am" line?
Only because I was hoping they'd say no. I didn't want them to know who I was. So, of course, I have to end up taking some ridiculously late flight out to Montrose, show up, do a thing, come back, be back by tomorrow afternoon. So, folks, I apologize. I will not be in tomorrow. Do we know who's covering?
Johnny C.
Big John Caldera, who I listened to a little bit yesterday after I got to a place where I could listen to it on the app, even abroad. So it was good to hear that. You'll have John tomorrow. And then I'll be back all next week. And as far as I know, until the FCC or Salem comes in and changes their mind, I think I'll be with you from here on out. I can't promise you that's the last time I'll be gone because it's not. But here's what I can promise you. You stick around, and thanks for all the texts. I'll get to those during the break. We're going to hit the good stuff, the sweet stuff you've been missing now for a week, and that is the Thorpe Report, and you choose the news. It's me, George Brockler. Seriously. Right here on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Here I am, man on the scene. I can give you what you want, but you got to listen to 710 KNUS. That's me, the George Show right here. Listen, we've pushed it long because I wanted to dribble on and on about this awesome trip that I took. There's so much more to talk about. Billy and I just spent the break talking about how drivers from the Middle East may be the worst, and yet at the same time, awesomest drivers on the planet Earth. More about that later. But I don't want to take any more time away from the best part of the show, and that is, of course, the Thorpe Report, and you choose the news.
Hey, good morning, sir.
Good
Glad
morning.
to have you back. As you were talking about earlier, polar air is expected to make its way into Colorado this weekend, likely going to bring snow to the high country and plunging temperatures across the metro area. National Weather Service is saying we're going to be much below average. It sounds like my performance review around here. Likely along the Front Range Sunday through Tuesday, highs could fall into the teens with lows below zero and flirting with record daily lows in some spots around our metro area. Snow is possible along the Front Range and across the plains. The cold air mass is expected to move into our state and the central plains during Saturday. With it comes chances for freezing drizzle that could impact some of your travel conditions and possibilities. Chances for snow is going to increase on Sunday. We're probably going to get 1 to 3 inches possible across the plains. Widespread snow more likely in the mountains throughout the weekend. According to the state demographer's office, Colorado added more than 26,000 people in 2021 and more than 27,000 in 2022. That is the lowest growth rate Colorado has seen since 1990, when there were just 13,000 new Coloradans. Colorado saw an average of 70,000 new residents each year from 2010 to 2020.
It's so safe here.
Yeah, very, very safe. Very safe. So, state demographer Elizabeth Gardner said the slowdown, she thinks, is part to slower birth rate as well as an increase in deaths over the past 2 years to COVID. So we're dying faster. That's, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Blame the COVID.
Yeah, exactly. Authorities are looking for a suspect after a woman was shot in a retail area Wednesday near 53rd
Is that
Avenue
near the
in
leg?
Sheridan. Well, yes, exactly. It is. She was near 53rd Avenue and Sheridan Boulevard. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office said deputies responded just after 10:30 in the morning to a report of shots fired. They confirmed the shots were fired from the Sheridan's Estates mobile home park. Witnesses reported the suspect fired shots at a specific car that was the target of the shooting. However, the car was waiting at a traffic light on Sheridan Boulevard, and a woman in a business that was across the street was then hit by these stray bullets. She was hit by 2 gunshots, taken to the hospital. Injury is not life-threatening, and it appeared that several businesses were also damaged by gunshots, because that's one of the things that we seem to ignore, that when we fire the bullets, they've got to end up somewhere. So not always in the target.
That's true.
Yeah.
They don't just keep going.
No, it's not like the video games. A 17-year-old boy is accused of fatally shooting a 16-year-old girl and dumping her body near a dumpster on the same night that he shot and wounded her boyfriend. That's according to an arrest affidavit from Denver police. They've arrested DeAndre Holly, 17, in connection with the killing of Tiana Manuel, who was found dead December 26th outside an apartment complex on North Salida Street, the Gateway Green Valley Ranch neighborhood, and she was shot in the head. A deputy with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office was arrested by the Fountain Police Department yesterday on charges related to domestic violence. Dalton Bridges, 29, was arrested for sexual assault and secondary kidnapping related to domestic violence and booked into the Teller County Jail.
That hurts.
Yep, he's been with the sheriff's office since June 10th of 2019 and assigned to the Detention Security Division, according to the sheriff's office.
Jail guy.
Yep, a man was arrested for attempted murder and attempted assault after he allegedly intentionally drove into the Grand Junction Police Department Wednesday afternoon. Oddly enough, it is not a drive-through, but now it is. Nathan David Chacon is 45 and accused of purposefully driving his silver 2007 Silverado into the lobby around 12:30. Truck crashed to the front door of the lobby, came to rest after it collided with a retaining wall that divides employees from the public lobby. According to the arrest affidavit, video shows Chacon exiting the truck after the crash and then laying on the floor before being taken into custody.
Maybe he was hurt.
He kind of knew what he was doing.
Maybe he was epilepsy. I'm trying to think of some diabetic shock.
Yeah, they're saying in the arrest affidavit they did it on purpose, and I just keep thinking that what would be the point? Just I don't understand the thought process.
There are easier ways to turn yourself in.
A lot easier, and especially to express disapproval of, 26-year-old Glenwood Springs man was arrested yesterday for threats that he allegedly made against Suburban County School District teachers and staff. Charles Drawn was arrested in the Snowmass area of Pitkin County on charges of felony menacing, misdemeanor menacing, and interference with staff and faculty.
Interesting.
Yeah, on Tuesday, he allegedly posted several comments on the Summit Daily newspaper Instagram account that threatened teachers and school district staff, including the school superintendent, according to a news release. And one of our legislators, our national guy, Ken Buck, has introduced legislation to ban TikTok
I've
in
heard
the
of
United
Ken.
States. Yep, he introduced it into Congress yesterday. The No TikTok in the United States Devices Act. That's the best they could come up with. Not even a cute acronym or nothing. Okay.
Have you tried to see if it's an acronym?
Well, no, because it'd be NTUSDA, so it doesn't work that well. So there's no.
They could have
you know,
mixed the
vowel in
letters up
middle.
and come up with nuts.
They could
You know,
have.
they could have done
They-
a nuts
They
thing.
really could have helped us out here. We got to talk to Ken about. You got to help the show here. It would prohibit the Chinese-owned social media app from being downloaded onto any device in the country, not just government devices. That would mean your device, my device, any of our devices. Be no TikTok. Now, according to Ken Buck in a statement, he said TikTok is a clear threat to our privacy and national security. He said it's directly associated with the Chinese Communist Party and has been used to spy on Americans to gain an alarming level of access to users' phones. This should concern every citizen who values their privacy, security, and personal information. Banning TikTok nationwide is the only route to end this malicious cybersecurity threat. Oddly enough, he didn't express maybe you don't download it. But okay, I had choices, people. Choices.
It's a tough one. The something you said off air that I thought
Yeah.
was interesting is, if this is successful, what does this do for that generation? And there's millions of them.
Yes.
That generation, including my kids who use TikTok. What are their takeaways?
Yeah.
Are they? I mean, we're not a people that go, well, if the government says it, it must be right. We're
Yeah.
people that go, what are they doing and why are they doing it?
Yeah.
I got to believe my kids are like, you're kicking me off at TikTok?
Yeah, you're taking me off. What?
I'm not cleaning my room.
dances? Yeah,
You know?
I keep thinking that the branding of this is going to be absolutely awful. And the
Interesting.
Yeah, and the idea that we should be concerned about our privacy and security, but last time I checked, it's not mandatory. I don't have TikTok on my phone. So I just it's weird that it is something that is a choice to download, and then we're mad that's gonna.
I had downloaded it, and that was largely because when the kids had it, I thought I need to see what all the fuss is about.
Yeah.
And then I saw enough of it that I want to become an influencer.
Exactly.
I've decided the best way to make money isn't to actually earn it.
It is. It's because influencer is not a real job. It is not
Who says?
That is not a real
Bite your
job.
tongue.
It is not. People get paid for it. Doesn't mean it's a job.
That's like saying radio host isn't a real job.
Shh.
It
They're gonna
feels
find
like a
out.
real job.
They'll find out. Stop that. You're not supposed to tell them that. Oh, wait. Oh, my goodness. After a week off, it is that time again before George spills more of our internal secrets about how we don't really do any work. It is time to play You Choose the News, where we pretend this is actually work. Yes, we have scoured the interwebs for mere moments and then added some delicious headlines to really stupid stories about you and I. But since George hasn't been here for a week,
I'm excited.
This is a special
We're gonna
edition.
see the best collection of losers this park scene.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
it is Loser Day.
Bunch of losers.
We've been missing those.
Yes.
You made me feel like a loser.
She's a loser. You are such a loser. Loser.
Call my dad a loser?
Yeah, just like you, Ricky. Check out this loser.
Okay, who's calling me a loser?
Loser.
Yes, it's a Loser Day here on You Choose the News. These are previous stories that George, in his infinite wisdom, did not pick, and now we are going to recycle them today. Alrighty, sir. Here are your choices. Headline number 1, Nursing Home Science Project. Headline number 2, Do you know who I am? Headline number 3, Maybe they'll find out. Headline number 4, Being poor is fun. Alrighty, sir. Your choices again this morning are Nursing Home Science Project. Do you know who I am? Maybe they'll find out. And being poor is fun. What is your choice?
Well, only because it's already come up once. Do you know who I am?
Yes. Do you know who I am? That is the question that Michael Anthony Baltimore, 44, Pennsylvania, had been asking recently. And he wants all of us to know who he is. In fact, he has gone through some very, very special things in order to make sure we all know exactly who he is. See, you may recognize Michael Anthony Baltimore from his appearance on the reality show 90 Day Fiancé. Yes, Michael was looking for love on 90 Day Fiancé to find the woman who would finally capture his heart, where he could go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. However, that is not why we should have known Mr. Michael Anthony Baltimore. In fact, the Justice Department said we all should be much more familiar with him because he is on the U.S. Marshals 15 Most Wanted list.
What?
Yes. The man who is
Seems
44
like they do know who he is.
that is on the 15 Most Wanted list from the U.S. Marshals decided the best way to avoid capture was to go on a reality TV game show. Yes, it ended exactly like you thought it would. He was arrested in Florida after appearing on the show. So
what was he wanted for?
let me see what it is. Not sure what it was. Not sure what he was originally wanted for. But again, he made the top 15, so it couldn't have been anything good.
Listen, weirdly, as you're talking, Billy, unrelated to the topic, which I loved.
Yes.
One of the cameras here, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to get to YouTube and check out the George Brockler Show and 710 KNUS. One of the cameras just moved back on its own. I don't know if this is a new Mark thing, but moved back about 6 inches. It's the AI thing, buddy. I'm starting to get freaked out about the AI thing.
I think it's TikTok and the Chinese. They've taken it over.
Do we have TikTok here?
No, but we should. It's okay. Now, your second choice. What is your second choice this morning? Nursing home science project. Maybe they'll find out, or being poor is fun.
Being poor is fun.
Being poor is definitely fun. At least that is the opinion of billionaire Charlie Munger. Yes, Charlie Munger is the 98-year-old that came of age in the 1930s. And he is saying right now, all of you kids are just complaining. You don't know how good it is. He said we all need to be much, much happier. Munger's a longtime investment partner and fellow friend of Warren Buffett. And he says he doesn't understand why people today aren't more content with what you have. Because people have had much harder times throughout history. So again, he said, you should stop complaining and just be happy. I just look at that and think that somebody who is an investment partner of Warren Buffett at 98 years old may not be the best source of information about one, our society, or two, how to make it in today's
little
world.
eye-opening, by the way, having just come from Jordan, where poverty is a real thing, and it's all relative. Like,
it is.
These folks seem to be getting along every day. I'm sure they're not happy as clams on a fraction of what you and I take home every day. It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is. But Charlie Munger says they should just be happy. Just enjoy it.
Maybe they are. Maybe it's that kanafa.
Yes,
I don't know.
Whatever your overlords shall deem you worthy of.
Or the king.
Be happy. Yes. Final choice this morning, sir. Nursing home science project, or maybe they'll find out.
I feel like the nursing home science project must be explored.
Nursing home science project. Here we are traveling all the way to North Carolina, and we're going to meet a nursing home resident. Now, this resident did a in-house science project because they are, hooked up to an oxygen machine, but still have that naughty habit of smoking cigarettes. Yes, the Burlington firefighters responded at 3 a.m. to report of a possible burning fire inside the building. They did find a fire inside the building. They attended to the patient. They arrived and moved everybody to shelter in place. Medical oxygen was delivered to all the people. But basically, the person decided that, no, I know that I'm not supposed to be smoking. They've told me not to smoke. They've got signs in here smoking. I know I'm on oxygen, but what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that could happen is that the patient's now a burn patient and taken to a regional hospital and later to the UNC Hospital burn unit in Chapel Hill. They are in stable condition, but just like with Mr. Wizard and those stupid little kids, they learned a valuable science lesson. Yeah.
It's there's a demotivational slide out there, Billy.
Yes, there is.
They have that is a sinking ship.
Yeah.
And it says underneath, most of them are like, live on the wings of your dreams. This one says, it could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, that is fantastic. Oh, and that is it. That is the end of You Choose the News. Remember, always follow your dreams. But in my case, I'm just going to ask them where they're headed, and I'll hook up with them later. Again, it is nice to have you back, sir. And we're running late for a break. So back to you.
It is great to be back. And with that, we are going to cut away for a break. We'll come back for a few more minutes of jibber jabber. And then we're getting into that 7 o'clock hour where I want to talk with you about something on my mind in the news. Maybe you've even been thinking about it too. Get those numbers ready. 303-696-1971. Keep hitting us with the text. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, baby. Subscribe. George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brockler right back with you here, 710 KNUS. Not a lot of time to tell you about a superstar out there. I told you I have to go and travel across the state tomorrow to take care of a little bit of legal business because I'm still a practicing lawyer. There's a guy out there that does this, but like at a level I haven't been able to touch, and that's a guy named Dan Kaplis. You know, he's a friend of the show. You know, he advertises here. You know, he's also a radio guy. He was a radio guy here for years. But one thing that has always been a priority for Dan is the practice of law and the representation of his clients, every single one of whom is a victim. He's not out there representing the big wigs that are out there trying to squeeze money out of the little guy. He's the little guy's attorney, trying to make sure that they get a fair shake from the big guy. And he prioritizes that above just about everything else. I'd say the only thing not is his family. And that's for obvious reasons. Dan's obviously a big family guy. But he and Bobber, man, when they take on a case, it's not just, hey, we got another case in the door. Thank goodness we're going to be able to collect money. That's not it. Now the pressure's on. Pressure's on to get it done right. And if you want to figure out how they can help you best, you call them at 303-770-5551, 303-770-5551, or check them out at dankapleslaw.com, dankapleslaw.com. When we come back, I got a topic I want to talk with you about it. Hell, I wrote a column about it in the Gazette. Stick around. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today. Want to take your
doing, man? That's it. That's it. See, the voice just isn't back yet. I'm going to hit it. This is a work in progress on the voice thing. I'm getting there. I guess I'm about 80%, maybe 85%. But when I can do Axel, you'll know I'm all the way back. Speaking of all the way back and with us, nice enough to join us on a morning where I presume he's doing the Mr. Mom thing again, our friend and the guy from the Independence Institute known as Josh Sharf. Josh, how are you?
Good morning, George, and welcome back yourself.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Have you been to that part of the world, man?
I've only been on the western side of the Jordan River, but yeah, of course.
Some folks call that Israel.
Right. Well,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, that's right. Each side, by the way, claims to have some place that represents the baptismal place for Jesus. The Jordanian one that I went to, they're confident it's them. But then right across the Jordan River is a much more built up, modernized, touristy, I guess, part of the Jordan River. And it's a big draw, man. Everybody goes there. And the day I happened to be by that spot by the river, the Armenian Pope, and I don't mean that as any sort of derogatory term, that's a legit, the Armenian Pope was there doing something. The security was ridiculous. I mean, they had dudes posted every 100 feet, these Jordanian soldiers everywhere. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, there's a significant Armenian Christian sort of, or I guess it's one of the branches of Eastern Orthodox presence in that part of the world. In fact, one of the quarters of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem, is divided up into 4 quarters, and one of them is the Armenian quarter. And so there's a not insignificant Armenian Orthodox population there as well. So yeah,
nobody will believe this, but in the walled city, in that ancient part of Jerusalem, there is an old store. I mean, they're all kind of old, I guess, but there's stores everywhere, as you know. And it's dedicated 100% to the University of Alabama. I mean, it's one of the most bizarre things to turn a corner and see, but I was with a guy named Sean Tonner and he screams out "Roll Tide," and he and this guy hugged it out, and it was like they were related or something, you know? And I'm like, here in Old Jerusalem, of all the universities, right? Alabama, Roll Tide. Like, what are you doing? I don't know how the guy makes money.
Well, you know, it's one of those. Well, he makes money when people like Sean, you know, turn the corner.
Oh yeah, of course he bought a bunch. You're right, he bought a bunch.
Yeah,
crazy.
But you know, that's probably the guy's market angle. Is he's figuring, well, there are a lot of Americans who come through, and Alabama's got a, you know, for better or for worse, has a fairly significant fan base here in the U.S. well outside the borders of the state. So, you know, listen, I'll do that. These people are far from home. It'll be something. I mean, he probably doesn't, you know, he may or may not follow Alabama football, you know, from 5,000 or 10,000 miles away. But he probably, you know, that's probably how he makes his money. You know?
If Deion Sanders knew about it, he would get a Buff store out there. I don't know how he would do it, but that guy's one of the most incredible marketers I've ever seen. Also, that part of the world, as you know, from being on the west side of the Jordan River, those Jordanians are pretty critical players in what's going on over there, where they sit and sort of the buffer, if you will, that they create between Israel and some folks that may not be as pro-Israeli there on the north, all the way down through the south on the eastern side. That's legit, man. Jordan is a legitimate partner.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they are sort of thin in the sense that the population is not particularly large, but they are, and also, you know, a significant amount of it is not, you know, the Hashemites themselves, sort of the former what's the word, nomadic tribe that kind of settled down there is unfortunately a somewhat smaller percentage of the population, but they geographically, yeah, they're right in a sweet spot. I mean, they know that everybody kind of wants to keep them there for various reasons. So they play that up. I mean, they use that obviously to their advantage, and they should.
They should. I mean, with Syria there, Saudi Arabia on the side, Egypt down below, and there's different levels of stability and support from those countries. But And it was, I was sold on the fact that these guys are strategic partners for the long term. I mean, independent of almost anything else that goes on in Ukraine. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Jordan is a long-term investment.
Oh, no question. No question. They are, and they have been useful. They have been useful in not necessarily in direct action, but in like you say, for instance, what was going on in Syria, deterring that from moving south. So.
Yeah, unbelievable. So the reason I wanted to have you on, first off, are you doing mommy, daddy duty stuff right now? Because every time we talk to you, you've got a kid asleep 10 feet from you.
I do, but he woke up a little early, and actual mommy is not daddy mommy. Actual mommy is taking care of him right now. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So you're freed up to do the thinking and talking.
Yeah, well, I was a little prepared. I did have a chance to jot down some notes. So.
Well, while I was away, it turns out everybody got together and decided maybe giving tanks to Ukraine was a good deal. And so it looks like the U.S. is going to somehow funnel 31 Abrams tanks over there. It looks like the Leopards there from Germany are finally being freed up. What was the reason for this? Like, there had been significant delay, gnashing of teeth. Zelensky was around begging, hat in hand. What caused this thing to happen?
Well, it just took a while coming together. I mean, it was going to happen. Germany said, well, we're not going to send ours unless the U.S. sends theirs. And the U.S. was saying, well, what can we find that we can send? So we're sending Abrams tanks, but we're probably sending, like the 2 generations back. These are, make no mistake, these are, as you know, these are good tanks. The Abrams, the current generation Abrams are probably the best tanks, are the best tanks in the world. The older generation are certainly better than anything the Russians are putting up, and miles better than anything that the Ukrainians would have. Part of it is a sense that you can't just be fighting on defense. You have to be fighting to actually push back the other side, and that there were, given Russia's manpower, and let's face it, I mean, it's not the old Soviet Union, but it does have a significant manpower advantage over Ukraine. And so even if those troops that are being called up are raw and poorly trained and so forth, that weight does matter. And so so this was an attempt, I think, to give the Ukrainians a chance to punch through some of those lines. Both sides are preparing for offensives in advance of mud season. And
when's mud season?
When's mud season? So doesn't that show up in like late February and in early March, right, when things start to get, and then it goes on for maybe a month or so. And we saw that last year when the Russians thought that they would get this lightning quick victory,
right? And they
didn't, and then everything ended up getting stuck, especially on the eastern side, literally stuck in the mud. In the South last year, it turned out to be less of an issue. They were able to make some significant advances there, and the weather didn't. And it may just be because of the nature of the land, or it could have been a seasonal. It could have been just something odd about the annual pattern. But seemed to be less of an issue there. So we'll see what happens in the South. I know that there's been talk that having been pushed out of Kherson, now they've been building up, the Russians, that is, on the other, what's called the East Bank, sort of also kind of the southern bank of the river there, and whether that's defensive or preparations for an offensive, we don't quite know, although the Ukrainians are worried about that. So, but there's also, Ukrainian buildup as well. So we could end up seeing clashing offenses. What's interesting, and people say, well, the Germans are giving, 14 tanks, and we're giving 31.
How many of those 14, by the way, and I heard this somewhere, are tanks that are German tanks that they had given to Poland, but part of the agreement with Poland is you can't give these to anybody else without our permission. And then Poland said, hey, folks, we'd love to give these tanks to Ukraine. Germany hemmed and hawed. And then my understanding is Poland said, it's happening with you or without you. And that, plus all the other pressure, got, what's his name, Schultz, to finally be like, okay, I got it.
Yeah, I think there was I think and you also saw the Estonians giving some of their artillery, saying that they were going to send some of their artillery pieces. It was an amusing Twitter debate going on about what constitutes a tank, which is funny because, of course, a tank has a very specific definition. Self-propelled artillery is not a tank. But people who didn't know any better would look at this thing, this armored thing with a gun sticking out, and say, "Well, that's obviously a tank." Well, it's not a tank. But the Estonians giving theirs as well. I think there's some suspicion that part of this on both on the part of the Estonians and the Poles is that then they'll be first in line for the newer good American stuff. So there may be a secondary motive as well on their part, but the numbers don't sound very huge. But what you have to remember is that this isn't Kursk, all right? During World War II, the enormous tank battle at Kursk, there were like 6,000 tanks there on both sides combined, and here you're talking about a battlefront where a relatively small number of tanks can produce a breakthrough. Last year, there was in the Eastern Front, there was a point where the Ukrainians had, I don't know, something like somewhere between 10 and 15 tanks. I think that's the number. And they were able to produce a significant breakthrough in the Russian lines just with that number of tanks. And it was considered, that this was I'd say a large formation, but it was a significant formation of tanks. So giving about 50 tanks is not insignificant. It gives obviously some replacements, but it lets you do stuff in multiple places at once. I think one of the things to be aware of with the Abrams tanks and people need to know is that these are one of the nice things about them is that they can run on just about any kind of fuel, assuming you have the right fuel filter. They can run on almost anything that you would use as any sort of petroleum that you would use as fuel. That said, they get terrible mileage, like half a mile to the gallon, and
we need
so
solar, obviously.
Well, no, I mean, right, of course, you want to put solar panels on them, but the that gets in the way of the reactive armor, though. So
that's a problem. That's legit too. If there's ever a ding in the armor, they cover it up with a tarp because only certain people are authorized to see it and fix it. I mean, it's incredible stuff. I mean, maybe they take a little bit of the regulation off if it gets deployed there in Ukraine, but there's no screwing around, man. They take that reactive armor stuff seriously.
No, in all seriousness, yes, they do. But so that's a slight disadvantage of those. Also, they are very tricky to maintain. So when you compare that to the Russian tanks have always been a lot easier to maintain, in part because they never had the supply ability and the ability to train people to do this. So they were operating with an assumption. The Russians have always been operating with an assumption that it would be difficult to repair or replace. So you want to make that as easy as possible. Or repair, I should say. So you want to make that as easy as possible. Americans have
feels very Kalashnikov-y too, right? Like that thing you could drag through a swamp and it was always going to work. It may not have been the most accurate or the best, but it was reliable.
Yeah, and so those are the things that the Ukrainians were using. So they've been getting a lot of training back in both in the UK and in the US on how to. I don't know about in the US. I don't want to say that. I don't know if that's true, but they've been getting a lot of training in the West about how to do this. So hopefully that will pay off. It also, of course, limits the number of tanks that you can send them, right? Because if you only have so many people who are trained on maintaining them, you don't want to send them more than they're capable of absorbing. But consider the larger picture here. The Ukrainians, on the whole, were always using Warsaw Pact stuff, old Warsaw Pact stuff, and that is now slowly being supplanted and replaced with NATO stuff. And so what you are seeing, one way or the other, is the slow integration of NATO Ukraine into NATO as militarily.
There are some prominent voices in Congress and talking heads and whatnot. And we're talking with Josh Sharf from the Independence Institute about the situation in Ukraine, who are continuing to voice strong objections to providing even one red cent for Ukraine. And I hear this all the time. People saying, this is a European issue. Europe should take care of this. We shouldn't be involved. This is going to get us into a war. And some of the people I've heard, well, I just flat disagree with. They're like, why aren't we negotiating with Putin? Like, Ukraine is something we can agree to divide up or something on behalf of the world. Like, okay, what would you take, Vlad? You know, that kind of thing. What's going on there? Do you sense any momentum one way or the other on this issue? And is this quickly going to become an R&D issue or something else?
I don't think it's going to become an R&D issue, although I do see that the primary opposition to it seems to be coming from the R's. But I think that the bulk of the Republican Party is behind this. And so I don't think you're going to see it being a strictly partisan issue, but it's clear where the opposition is coming from. One of the and there are some things that are of legitimate concern. One of the things that you saw, does this widen up? And here's a method by which this could widen up. Last year, we know that there were a few isolated attacks on supply depots in Europe. So these would be NATO. I don't know if they were NATO supply depots per se. I don't know if they had that, that color, if you know, or if they were national supply depots of NATO countries. But there were a couple of attacks on there, and then there was late last year there was a letter bomb campaign in Spain directed against some targets in Madrid, an arms manufacturer in I want to say it was the Northeast, and the Ukrainian and the U.S. embassies all received letter bombs. So there's a suspicion that was kind of a test of a trial balloon for what might be done if this were to continue, and it also does call into question whether or not supply routes, probably NATO supply routes in Ukraine on the way to the front rather than outside Ukraine. But then do those eventually come under attack as well? Is Russia willing to do that if they see themselves as losing? So there is, listen, I mean, the people who are opposed to it are not completely irrational. I mean, this is not an irrational fear that if Russia really sees this as an existential threat, that if they no longer exist, if Russia no longer exists as a European power, that is an exit. And then you have stupid talk like, well, the end of the war has to be the partition of Russia, into multiple regions that are demilitarized, and so garbage like that. I mean, then all that's going to do is heighten their paranoia. So you got to understand there will be a unified militarized Russia after the end of the war.
Yeah.
And you can't have other allegedly responsible actors making comments like that. All that does is make things worse. So there is some fear that Russia will try to widen this thing if they see themselves losing. One of the and
they don't
I would
see
also,
themselves losing right now.
I think they well, it depends on what you mean by losing. They're still occupying more territory than they did before, and the Ukrainian offensive, while it was effective, has reached culmination, and now there's some back and forth. There's sort of fighting back and forth while they both gear up. We'll see. They've made some changes to the command structure. They have more troops coming in. I don't think anyone's happy with the performance of the military, but that's different from accepting that you're going to lose. The other thing that I think is legit I think on historical terms, as a percentage of the GDP, for instance, let's take that as a metric. The amount of money amount of aid that we're giving to Ukraine is not that large. It certainly is small compared to, say, what we were doing with Britain before, in 1940 or 41. And so I think we have to keep that in perspective, that sort of as a percentage of the overall economy, this is not a ton of money. However, there's nothing the matter with looking at how it's being spent. I mean, that was how Senator Truman, rose to prominence and became a candidate to be vice president when FDR ran in 1944. Was he headed up a committee to look at war spending, and this was during World War II. So I don't think it's entirely irresponsible to say, well, how is this money being spent? I think that's a reasonable question. But that said, this is, in terms of guaranteeing European security, so far it's been kind of a bargain. It has not been tremendously expensive, and it certainly shouldn't tax our economic resources.
That Institute for the Study of War that I put out there, taking a look at it, consistent with what you're saying, they've said that, listen, Russia right now is engaged in these little skirmishes, these little spoiling attacks that they call them, with about 10 to 15 people that they think are designed to distract and disperse the Ukrainian forces in anticipation of probably one of these pre-mud season last big offensive. Is that the next thing we should be looking at, Josh, or is there something else? And do you have anything in your mind that tells you this will be over by blank and Putin will or will not be at the head of Russia when it happens?
Listen, Russia still has some tremendous resources, and like I say, it still has the advantage that it can kind of keep bringing up men. That has proven
unhappy men, but yeah.
No, yeah, but if you don't, we're going to haul you off to jail, or we're going to haul you off to the front anyway, and more's the worse for your family. So so you go. I think there's I don't listen, everybody, it'll all be over by. No, I have no idea. I mean, listen, last year at the beginning when this thing started, I was having a conversation with someone, and I said, this thing, and it had been going on for maybe a week or couple of weeks. I said, this thing's going to go on for, could go on for months. And they were shocked, like, months.
And
and
you were a little light on that.
It's going to go on. Who knows how? Well, I thought I had no, who knew that Ukraine would hold together as well as it has, but it's demonstrated, as we've mentioned before, great solidarity and resilience. So I think I don't, no, I don't. I'm not, even for entertainment purposes only. I have no idea what the over under on when it would be over and who's going to win would be. I just have no real sense of that. One thing that I will say, and that is of some concern and should be of some concern, both with respect to Ukraine and with respect to what everyone thinks is the perspective, what we're trying to deter, which is the prospective war with God forbid, with China over Taiwan, is that this is exposed, and the Wall Street Journal had an article, I think, about this earlier this week, serious supply problems on our side, especially when it comes to ammunition. The ability to rapidly produce ammunition just apparently does not exist. And that's a real problem. It is not so far a real problem in Ukraine, but it could become one. And a wider war, God forbid, it would absolutely be one. And we're drawing down stocks now when we should be thinking about rebuilding them. So hopefully that'll get addressed.
Well, Josh, once again, I could continue to talk with you for hours on this, but I'm going to cut you loose to go relieve Mrs. Sharf in the care of your little one. How many kids do you have that you know of? Well, I don't know, Josh. I mean, you said you were in Israel. Who knows what you did there? Only you know.
Just one living with us. No, we have a 3-year-old. We have a 3-year-old who is a piece of work. He is tremendous.
Well, keep making more taxpayers, would you? Tell your wife I've encouraged it. Yeah, that's exactly right. Josh Sharf with Independence Institute, man. We'll have you back on soon. Thanks for the conversation.
Take care, George.
Hey, that was Josh. Love that conversation because he just knows stuff. You can tell he's been there. He's read about it, talked about it, done it. I mean, just a wicked smart guy. So I'd love to have that conversation. When we come back, we'll change it up a little bit. But if you have thoughts on this, and I'm anxious to hear this too, should we be getting out of Ukraine at this point? Are you one of the voices that says, nope, none of our business, we shouldn't be there? 303-696-1971. George Brockler on The George Show at 710 KNUS. George Brocker back with you here on 710 KNUS. Some text coming in here. Some folks asking about what's going on with the state party. That's something that's coming up in the near future here. There's some stuff going on that we could get KBB on for one of her swan song appearances to talk about what's next. There's also someone who's letting us know a huge asteroid is going to fly by Earth. It's one of the closest approaches ever, NASA says. Asteroid 2023. Be concerned. This text generated by AI. Let's go to the phone lines, 303-696-1971. That's the number that Jim called. Jim, you're on 710. What do you think?
Hey, good morning. As far as Ukraine is involved, there is no getting out of this. And if we play this correctly, we could this could be the final battle of the Cold War, and we could end up crushing the communist threat to the nation and the world all at the same time.
Well, tell me what Jim wants to see happen here. How do you see this one to play out?
I don't really have any wants, but I do believe that it is going to fundamentally change our currency as we get the rest of the NATO nations, the developed nations, to continue to sign on to our financial system that is paired up between the Federal Reserve and the U.S. military. The military has turned into the enforcement arm of the Federal Reserve.
How so? Tell me about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, since the entire Cold War, especially during when we got everybody to sign on during the early 80s with the Plaza Accord, and revalue our dollar and their currencies to our medium of exchange around the world, the dollar, the greenback.
Are you talking about leaving the gold standard?
Or it's even after the gold.
So how does the military become the enforcement arm for that?
Well, when I got out of high school, I was escorting Saddam's oil through the Ayatollah's waters. We were escorting tankers. We put an American flag on a Liberian tanker, and we went through the Silkworm missile envelope in the Straits of Hormuz. And it's continued from there on out. Everybody that buys oil from the Saudis, we protect the Saudis. We're talking the Japanese, which was the world's second biggest economy, the Germans. And now we are going to reindustrialize America with this currency system. But our currency is going to be worth far less to our citizens, but we will win the communist Cold War fight.
Well, and tell me then, make that connection for me, because I'm obviously not that bright. How does what we're doing in Ukraine tie into what you're talking about here?
Well, the Ukraine is a forward. It's an encroachment. If you understand that we have installed Aegis radar systems and missile systems in the surrounding countries, the former Soviet nations, and Ukraine is the overall prize to break down the communists. We're going to have weapon systems on their front porch, and they're only in Ukraine. Heck, they're only a couple hundred miles away from Moscow, their capital. So,
but are you supportive of this effort? Or do you think, like, there's a bunch of voices out there that say no more money to Ukraine? This is Biden's thing. They think it has something to do with Hunter in some way. I don't know.
No, come on. Now all of a sudden, the libtards, Biden and his family are the neocons. Come on, get real. What we're doing is we're defending our currency against commie coin or commie dollars. And we're going to ensure.
Is that all you see it as, though, Jim? You don't think we're defending Ukraine itself? We're trying to push back on Russian encroachment? It's not that. It's currency related?
Yeah, it's the world is controlled by currency markets, financial markets. And I don't think there's any escaping that. I don't think that these people that say we have free markets here have brain cells within their skulls that are actually functioning.
That's a dark view of this. I'm not saying that there isn't evidence for it, because you know this, but the idea that our only motivation to be in Ukraine has less to do with Russia's encroachment on their sovereignty, a sovereignty, by the way, we committed to defend, than it does some sort of financial market, which probably plays a role. But if that's the single motivating factor, don't you feel like that's a pretty dark view of how it's working there internationally?
I think it's reality. I don't think we're going around the world defending human rights, individual rights, women's rights. I think we use these as excuses to get people to lock on to our currency, our financial markets, so we can control things from that aspect. And we've got communism that we have used as the great threat for decades on end.
So it's not that we're opposed to the system because it's destructive of human individuality and liberty and all that. It's because it has a negative impact on our financial market?
Absolutely, yes.
Jim, that's such a dark, skeptical way to view it. I get that we're not out there putting out every single human rights violation in the world, but there's a huge difference, and we do invest time and effort into this, by the way, in the DRC versus Ukraine, just in terms of proximity, risk, potential for the future. And that's why we don't do the same thing in Rwanda we're doing in Ukraine, and it's a different kind of issue anyway.
So our military is out there defending the world, making people's lives better, just for the sole purpose of making people's lives better. And furthering the world for democracy.
Oh, no, I hope it's more than that.
Absolutely not.
I don't want a single man or woman in uniform to be overseas trying to make someone else's life better. That is not their job. Their job is to defend and advance our interests. If that also includes the happy coincidence of making someone's lives better, yay. But I don't want them over there doing anything just because it's better for someone else.
Correct. And so let's see, our nuclear weapons being in South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey, and driving them up through the between Oman and Iran over the decades, and having them in Israel is just human rights associated. No, it's for a purpose. It's to control, or at least pay for the control that we have given the world after World War II. I mean, and now we're going to deglobalize somewhat, and these short supply chains are going to become elongated, and we're going to pair up with our NATO partners, and we're going to trade amongst ourselves, but we're not going to have some of this trading going on, while at the same time, everything's going to shift towards Africa when it comes to labor and labor costs and production, because you can't really say that we've been successful.
Why not India? Aren't we already seeing that with India? Why Africa?
Yeah, in India as well, but Africa's got the new young population coming up. So the Federal Reserve currently, this last week, spent time in the African nations talking about future currency markets and a future partnership with the American system and the African nations, because we know that that's where the young people are. So China's screwed. They are done. They have gone down in population for the first time since their famines this last year. And maybe China's population is overcounted by, they say, perhaps 100 million young people. They've been lying. So.
Jim, it's interesting. You know a bunch of stuff in this area, and I don't doubt that viability of economic markets is part of the American interest that drives some of these things. But it's just such a dark, skeptical place to be, to think that that is the primary motivator, that we're not there because Ukraine has been invaded by Russia, and that Russia's expansion into Eastern Europe, maybe it's a re-expansion or just a reaffirmation of the role they think they should play, but that somehow that is secondary or tertiary.
In Iraq, I mean, somebody in 2000,
WMDs, man.
Even, well, there you go. Except the elusive WMD.
Turns out they weren't there. Yeah.
Yet one of our leaders had this theory of we need to overcome 7 countries in 5 years. I think it was. Okay, these were Middle Eastern countries that had oil influence. The oil is traded in U.S. dollars and it's deposited in Federal Reserve banks, and that's the system we're trying to defend. And I spent time defending, doing Operation Earnest Will in the 80s, escorting Saddam's oil through the Ayatollah's waters. So, and I don't know, maybe life in the military is volatile.
Jim, I'm missing you.
Around the world.
I'm losing you.
Oh.
Jim, thanks for the phone calls. Always very insightful. I am interested in your perspective because you've been over there and you've done some things and you've clearly read up on this. I'm just not sure I can get myself there. And maybe you're going to say that's just a function of your naivete, but I don't see it. I mean, I see our economic interests as a prime motivator, but not the sole motivator, or even more important than the idea that we're pushing back against a communist regime. And Russia is communist. I mean, it's still communist. A communist regime that poses a threat to our other friends and allies and neighbors in Europe. I don't know. Rick, Bob, I'm going to get to you guys. I want to cut away for a quick break here. Let me just do something smart that I have to do, and that's to tell you about this here real estate market. Now, as you know, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, we get our buddies from Alpine Planning to come on. And if they came on today, they would talk to you about the things going on with interest rates. We know that Canada has said it's the last time they're going to ever increase theirs, or at least in the short term here, because they're looking at the market. I've read a whole bunch of articles about this saying, hey, maybe it's possible we'll avoid a recession while we continue to see the economy start to slowly nestle down into something short of a crater. That's all great stuff. And it's going to impact the real estate market as well. See an uptick in the number of buyers, interest in homes. Who do you want to help you navigate those waters? Gay Ribble with Empower Home Team, Keller Williams Realty. Gay Ribble has all the buyers. It's not just something she puts in her website, which is coincidentally gayhasthebuyers.com, but it's because she does. She's been doing this so long. 14,000 plus people have said, please put me on your list. And when a house comes open that you're listing, I want a first shot at it. That's the definition of Gay Has the Buyers. And then once she gets you that top dollar for that home in this increasingly competitive market, Gay's the person that helps you get into your dream home for the best price at the best location. And she's got all these guarantees, including guaranteeing to sell your house at the price you want and the time you want. You got to call to get all the details. There's just too many great things that she does. 833-301-SOLD, 833-301-SOLD. Or again, go to gayhasthebuyers.com. That's gay, Gaye, hasthebuyers.com. When we come back, Rick, Bob, everybody else on hold at 303-696-1971. I'll get to you. It's George Brockler on the George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Brockler right back with you here, 710 KNUS. Going to the phone lines. Bob, you're on 710. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I wanted to weigh in on the situation in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I guess what prompted me was listening to your conversation with Jim, and he's talking about it being a fight against communism, and then I heard your comment that Russia's still communist, but I disagree with that. Russia's dropped communism as an ideology.
Sure, formally they have,
I think,
but the dudes who are running the KGB are still with their hands on the levers of government.
Well, I think you could say that Russia is an autocracy, that it's become more autocratic with
That's true.
Putin
Yeah,
in there.
that's fair.
And he was the former head of the FSB, and I'm a student of history, and I've read several books about Putin, and I've been over to the Ukraine a couple of times, but and it's not surprising, because most Americans don't know that much about the history of the world, but Russia is not a communist economic system or communist country.
Maybe autocracy is the better way to go, but they still have all of those leanings and all of those government apparatus in place to affect the outcome.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about was, what's the end game going to be here?
What do you think it is? What should it be, Bob? I mean, should we be there? One, do you think so? And if so, what's our end game?
Well, we're there. So, the question of should we be there, I think that's moot now. I mean,
I don't think so. I don't think so. We can always, back off, limit our participation. I mean, if you thought it was the right thing to do, you could say, I think we need to leave. Where's your head?
Well, I listened to Peter Boyles about this before he retired, and he didn't think we should be in there.
I know. I remember. He and I had some debates.
Yeah, I'm more of a traditionalist on international relations and more of a realist, believing in the power, geopolitical power situation. And, maybe I've read too much history, but, spheres of influence have always been a part of international relations, and buffer states have been a part. And, so I can see Putin's viewpoint that, NATO was slowly moving towards.
Yeah, I get it. And Jim, you're going to hate me for this, but I got about 5 seconds to give you before they cut us off.
Well, this is Bob. You're talking.
Oh, sorry, Bob. Sorry, Bob. I got now about 5 seconds.
You got about 5 seconds. Well, I think the end game is, it's not inevitable. I think that what's going to happen is not.
Forgive me, man. I appreciate it. I don't like doing it. I'm sorry I had to let you go there. Listen, Dave Migoya coming up next. Local story, big deal. George Brockler, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Bracco back with you here, hour 3 of 4 on 710 KNUS. I'll be with you till 10. Charlie Kirk after that. A guy named Prager shows up sometime around 11. Maybe a dude named Gorka. And then we go live and local with Deb from 3 to 4. And Jimmy S. covering for, I honestly don't know what's happening. Somebody told me that maybe Stefan had hand surgery or something. And I presume it's like a facelift for his hand. If you've ever seen his hands, I mean, he's desperate to keep them looking as supple and as effeminate as they've ever been. He was a hand model earlier in his life before he turned to the news. A lot of people don't know that. And I imagine this is some sort of restorative surgery. Obviously, best of luck to him in recovery for that. But Jimmy S. will be here from 4 to 7 with us right now. We are on the show with one of the guys that we've had on a bunch because he's such a super investigative reporter for the Gazette. But also this story has been going on and taking different turns for years now. Joining us to talk about it, David Migoya. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Well, good morning, George. How are you?
It's been great. By the way, I'm glad to be back in the saddle. I continue to read your stuff here. I was abroad when this story broke, so I was anxious to be able to talk with you about it before someone else really got into it. Have you talked about this everywhere? I like this story quite a bit.
No, I haven't. Actually, I noticed the last couple of days that you were away. I was listening to John riding the saddle yesterday, and I said, wow, all right, George is gone. Where's he at? So you took a little R&R. Good for you.
No, not R&R. It was military duty in a place called Jordan. And
nice.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I wish it was a little more
tan. I'm sure you brought your tan home. There you go.
Yeah, you've seen me. I am translucent. There's no tanning going on. There's a combination of colors that are white and pink and red. That's about it.
That's right. That's right.
Now, you started this story a long time ago. I imagine anybody that's been listening to the show for any period of time recognizes your voice and the topic that you covered. But can you do us a favor? Just set the stage for how we got to this latest release of information about the investigation of the former Chief Justice.
One of these days, I'm just going to write it down and read from this.
I know. We should just have an auto-recorded thing that we can play.
Oh, boy. Just simply put, 2019, I broke a story that said the former chief of staff at the Supreme Court Administrator's Office, or the State Court Administrator's Office, was given a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. And she was on the way out the door. She was being fired for financial problems that she had. And instead of being tossed, she ended up landing this big contract. That was in July 2019 when I broke that story. February of 21, a little bit later, we broke the story that the former state court administrator, Chris Ryan, he had resigned at the time of my first stories, said, hey, guess what? That contract was a little more than you thought. In fact, she was threatening to go with a lawsuit. In a memo, she was going to put out all these allegations of judicial misconduct that were never handled either appropriately or at all. And if you fire me, I'm going to sue you. So instead of being sued, they gave her that contract. That's what started and in that meeting was supposedly the Chief Justice. Well, he was in the meeting. What the supposedly is whether or not the Chief Justice actually approved that quid pro quo deal. So that's how we end up where we are. And everything hit the fan when that story broke. And that's been since February of 21.
Now, the story has taken some turns. There have been some investigations. Some people have left employment. Contracts were canceled. At some point, somebody hired an outside agency to investigate the potential involvement of the Chief Justice. Who did that hiring and who did they hire?
Well, there were 3 investigations that did that. 2 inside the judicial department itself. Legislators put together and lawmakers put together by the various branches of government, put a committee together to decide how are we going to investigate this. They hired 2 different companies, one of whom was Bob Troyer, the former U.S. attorney here in Colorado. I know you know Bob.
Yep. No Bob
he did one of the investigations. And then there was another investigation launched by the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel. I know you know who they are. They're the guys that oversee licensing for lawyers in Colorado. And the first 2 investigations came out, said, nothing to see here, people. Really toxic environment, bad place to work, a lot of crazy people running around. But the Chief Justice, all good, didn't do anything wrong. And this latest investigation through the Office of OARC, they hired 2 lawyers out of Illinois that do a lot of attorney regulation, licensing, investigating. And their findings after a year and a half, that gets turned over to what's called the Legal Regulation Committee. That's a group of 11 people, lawyers and non-lawyers, that are put together by the Supreme Court. And their job is to review complaints that come in about lawyers. Don't forget, our justices are all licensed attorneys. And they decide whether or not any charges should be brought based on the information put before them. So this independent investigators out of Illinois gave their report. I heard it was as long ago as October, but nobody knows because that report's not public. Gets handed to this 11-person group in secret. They look at everything, and then they came out with their announcement this past Friday that said, we just don't have enough clear and convincing evidence to prove. And you as a prosecutor would know what that means, to be able to prove that former Chief Justice Coates did anything wrong. So we're just going to dismiss everything.
Couple questions.
So that's what it was.
Who makes up this 11-person board that punted on this thing?
The Supreme Court.
And they just
they name all 11 people. Yes, they just choose them. They are volunteers. They serve for 7 years and staggered terms. And those 7 years, the chairperson and vice chair of that committee, and it's been the same guy for over a decade, an attorney out of Boulder named Steve Jacobson, a defense lawyer. Steve has been the chair of that committee for a long time. And as chair, he gets to serve as many as 14 years.
Oh, boy.
But they are all appointed by the Supreme Court.
So, and who sets the standard by which they decide whether they can move forward? And I ask it in this context, and the language appears in your article. They don't have clear and convincing evidence. And for folks that don't know how the legal system works, on the criminal side, beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest standard there is. There is nothing higher than that. On the civil side, clear and convincing evidence is the highest standard there is. Why did they pick that standard as opposed to something more like reasonable suspicion or probable cause or preponderance of the evidence?
Well, I think, it really comes down to talking about taking away somebody's license to practice law. And the legal community sees that, and I'm sure other professions, sees that as a very high standard that needs to be reached in order to get to that. So if there's not enough in their mind, now they're the ones deciding. So it's almost like a mini jury. If you can't even get to that level, let's just move on. And that's how they view it. Now, what evidence? Don't forget, these 2 investigators issued a report along with recommendations. We don't get to see what those recommendations were.
Why not?
We don't know if they said, because it's secret. That's how the process is put together.
Buddy, this is frustrating, as you can imagine. All of this paid for by taxpayers, right? You and I and everyone else listening foot the bill for this thing.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And there's no way to know what those recommendations were. For all we know, and I'm not suggesting otherwise, but for all we know, those recommendations could have been other than what the committee found. I don't know that. I'm not saying it is. I just don't know. So there's no way for us to independently read that report and say, here's what the investigators found. So all we know is that committee said no way to prove it clearing and convincingly, which doesn't mean he didn't do anything. It's just not enough proof to be able to pursue, in their opinion.
And we'll never get access to that record under the current situation. You have also done a great job, David, of cataloging the reform efforts that exist. And I imagine that there are still a couple making their way through the General Assembly right now. Is that true?
Yeah, there are. That was the interim committee of legislative last year in the legislative session. Those guys took testimony all summer long, a number of hearings, dealing with the judicial discipline process. And what was particularly exciting about those hearings was that the man who stood up and made these initial allegations, Chris Ryan, whose career has been basically destroyed as a result of having done this, he sat before the committee and let them know, stood firm again to say this entire investigative process, all these reviews, all these independent everythings are all designed to have the same outcome: protect the robes. That was Chris's testimony. So out of those committee hearings have come a number of recommendations for change, one of which your listeners and everybody else will be able to take up in next year's general election with a constitutional amendment that removes the office of judicial discipline, the guys that actually discipline judges, will have that independent of the Supreme Court. Right now, it sits underneath them, and all the money that they operate under or operated under came from the Supreme Court. That got changed last year, but their rules and everything else still kind of sit within the rules created by the Supreme Court on how they operate. That's been a really big battle between those two organizations. And now we see legislators taking up some additional changes to that process that really all hinge on whether or not voters approve this constitutional amendment last year, because that's how judicial discipline is all put together by the Constitution.
So up to this point, without these changes in place, it's the Supreme Court that picks who does the investigation, unless I'm wrong. They fund it, and then they decide what the public gets to know about it.
Yeah, that's a little more too narrow of a view, George, but essentially,
tell me where I'm
down
wrong,
to its rawest form.
Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, a number of things. They get to choose the OARC, or I'm sorry, the legal, the committee that just made this decision for the OARC's office. But they don't get to decide. The Supreme Court doesn't get to decide what happens to that investigation. By extension, you might say, well, it's their people, so on and so forth. They didn't get to choose the two investigating companies, Bob Troyer and another outfit called the ILG Group. They didn't get to choose them and hire them for the investigation. That was done by a committee put together by the governor's office, the AG's office, the legislators, and whatnot. They did pay for it, but they didn't get to choose them. And when those findings came out by those two investigative groups, the Supreme Court managed to start doing some changes to the process of rules of how judicial discipline happens. So, for instance, one of the latest things the Supreme Court did is they approved the rule that they must recuse themselves from any investigation of wrongdoing allegations against the judge who was either a sitting Supreme Court justice or a former justice, such as Justice Coates. Previously, they were allowed to sit in judgment of their own.
Wow.
And nobody ever changed that. So part of this whole thing is in an effort to kind of make this much more transparent. And you got to remember, George, this is a branch of government that's much more independent than the other two. I know you know this, but I mean, they're not even subject to our open records laws. And I know that's a thorn in your side.
Oh, yeah. That
goes way
bugs me
back
quite a bit.
So this was really the first time that anyone had really started lifting up the robe, so to speak, and having a look. And what's been happening, it's been a very reluctant, very resistive process in changing how the judiciary looks at itself and how the public is allowed to see what actually happens behind the curtain.
Is any of that Cora stuff going to change under all the reforms that are being proposed?
I don't know. I've heard some rumblings, but you're talking about a really, really difficult place because the judiciary is such a protected area, probably for good reason, back when it was all designed that way. So for anyone to really tackle the Supreme Court and make their world public under the same rules as all the other branches of government, that's a tough pull. Now, don't forget, that's not to say there aren't laws in place that allow the public, you and I, to take a look at what's happening in the judicial department. It's just not through the Colorado Open Records Act. It's called through a law called PAIR, what it stands for, like Public Access to Information and Reporting something, PAIRR. That's their version of Cora. And there are some parts of it that are a little more.
Who decides whether
the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when you have a problem with any other branch of government, your recourse is, well, I'll go to court and I'll get a shake there from a judge. When it's the court itself, where do you go?
Well, there was a part of this whole story where the Discipline Commission was challenging the effectiveness, the constitutionality, for want of a better way, of what the Supreme Court was doing in their efforts to investigate. The commission was basically told, so sue us, knowing that the ultimate decision on whether or not it's legal was going to be by the very people that were stopping them.
It feels like in any other setting, the obvious answer would be that's a conflict of interest. You can't have your own agency deciding and be the sole arbiter of whether or not someone gets access to that information. So, for instance, if you, as you know, David, when you make a core request of, let's say, a police agency, and they stiff arm you and they don't comply with the rules and they cheat you out of something, costly or not, you have the ability to go to court and say, I'm going to sue you under Cora, basically, because you didn't comply with this thing. There's no vehicle for that under this.
There is the vehicle. The problem is it's the same vehicle. You can sue them, but the very ones that are telling you no are the ones that are going to decide that lawsuit.
I just, any chance, by the way, with these changes of the law, any chance that we'll get to see this report finally?
You know, I don't think so. I certainly, as a reporter, and my desire is to let the public know what's happening. I'm trying to figure out how that report is accessible in the public realm. It's not. It won't be released by request. It might come up to the Judiciary Committee at the legislature, but I don't know how that would happen. That it's the rules of investigating attorneys is a very restrictive process. That it doesn't become public until there are findings made as a resolution to an investigation. The finding in this case is that we don't need to look any further. There's not enough here to prove wrongdoing, and clearly and convincingly. So that's not to say they didn't find evidence of wrongdoing, just not enough to be able to win the case if they go after it, in their opinion. So I just don't know where else it might show up. I really don't. I think this one gets put on a bookshelf and stays there.
Is this the end? I mean, I realize there's going to be the law changes and stuff like that, but like when you're looking at this and you've been on this train for years now, what's left?
The Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline, the very guys whose job it is, they're 10 people. I mean that in the collective,
of course,
non-binary sense, of course.
Right.
They are still investigating Chief Justice Coates. I know that investigation exists from the person who filed the complaint. The commission itself is not allowed by law to disclose anything that it's working on. And under the current rules, it's still possible that commission could find and choose to issue discipline against Chief Justice Coates, former Chief Justice. But that recommendation would have to be given to the Supreme Court, and it would be up to the Supreme Court whether to allow it to be public, private, or just dismiss it.
That, again, doesn't that feel kind of like the conflict of interest thing?
Boy, it's been rolling around. I wrote a story a number of months ago that the Commission on Judicial Discipline very plainly flagged the Supreme Court of all their conflicts of interest in this whole thing. I think that's why the court passed this recent rule that says they have to recuse themselves, because otherwise the voters, we would all have to wait until the voter constitutional amendment gets passed in order to kind of create that rule. So to their credit, they jumped in front and said, look, we're just going to take care of this now. So theoretically, they have all recused themselves from anything that judicial discipline is looking at. I don't know if they're looking at the rest of the court other than just Coates, and that would be because when the stories first broke in February of 21 about this memo and all the allegations of quid pro quo, the court made a very public statement together that they didn't believe it was true, they didn't believe it to be accurate, that Chief Justice Coates would never do something like that. So now the court has essentially broken its own rules of judicial conduct by opining on something that they could well be the arbiters of later. That was the problem. And that's still hovering out there. So I think by them recusing, the new rule, they replace themselves with members of the appellate court to review any discipline. The commission of discipline has problems with that because they said, look, this is a very collegial group of people. They're all buddies. And a lot of the appellate court people will eventually become, or theoretically, members of the Supreme Court. So the commission wanted that group of arbiters, the new people, to look at anything that the Supreme Court has to step away from. They wanted that group to include district court judges, from a pool of them. And the Supreme Court didn't agree. Some legislators didn't agree. And so that's the rule we're living under now, is the appellate court would replace them. But that would only be if they bring charges. So if that happens and we find out there's a
discipline charges, not criminal charges.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's right. Discipline against
that criminal
judges,
ship
right?
has sailed, right? I mean, there's no chance that there's any sort of, did somebody already look under the hood on that?
Well, there's still the FBI out there. They were investigating at the front side of this, dealing with the issue of public corruption. So, and I don't, how the FBI works. I have no clue whether that thing is still floating around or not. The people I've talked to involved in this whole thing have said they haven't heard from them in a little while, but that's also not unusual. So, I suppose it's still floating out there, but there was an effort at prosecuting some of the people, the former chief of staff that wanted the contract, the former human resources director that was pushing for it, even Chris Ryan, the guy that blew the whistle on this whole thing. There was a recommendation to prosecute, and the Denver DA, as you might remember, basically said, "You guys took too long to give this to us. The statute of limitations, we don't have enough time to investigate this, and we're dismissing it." And that all went away.
I do remember that now. And I remember, too, the Denver DA's office ended up wanting to push back and blame, in part, the AG's office. Remember that? Because the AG's office was dragging its feet and said, hey, we don't have to turn this over, and some kind of privileged claim. I can't remember what it was, but the AG's office helped slow the process down and put Denver in a place where they at least could plausibly say, we just can't do it. We're out of time.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. There was a lot of back and forth, things that were being reviewed. It was really something. It took so long for that information to make its way to the DA when it really shouldn't have, but it did. And ultimately, the DA said there's just not enough time to do this in the manner that it needs to be done. So
and
we're just not going to do it.
AG helped protect them. I'm sure they're going to say, hey, we have to zealously represent our client, but let's get real. Dave Migoya, I could talk to you all day about this. I'm waiting for the next piece here. I want to see what's going to happen. It feels like we have hit a natural endpoint on some of it, but maybe we'll get more out of that disciplinary investigation.
That's possible, but I've also got another story that'll pique your interest. I don't know if I'll be able to get it this weekend. I'm trying. We'll see. It depends on how today goes, but it's possible. Much more in the vein of what we were just talking about earlier.
Well, keep up the super work by a super investigative reporter, Dave Migoya from the Gazette. You can find this article and all the others. Easy to just do a quick Google search, by the way, for Migoya and Supreme Court, and then 8 billion things pop up. That's what I did. Man, thanks for joining us, and thanks for doing such great work.
Well, I appreciate it, George. It's always good to talk to you, and glad to have you back on the air, my man.
It's good to be back. I'll talk with you soon. That was David Migoya. Listen, we'll cut away for a break. I'm not really sure here what to do with this, but if you're like me, you hear David talk about these things and you become frustrated because you're like, wait a minute, where's the accountability? Why is there a different standard for judges than everybody else in the state of Colorado? Because that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing a different process, a different level of protection, a different level of conflict of interest that we tolerate. It's a real problem here. And it makes me wonder, and someone texted in, is it time for some sort of a citizen initiative for an independent judicial oversight committee? Maybe it is, but maybe it's something more than that. Maybe we're at a place where we say, you know what? It's time for term limits for judges. It's time we set in some requirements so that we can limit the amount of special authority and power these men and women have. And that, by the way, that is not to say that I disrespect these people. I appear in front of them all the time. Hell, I'm going to appear in front of them tomorrow. But when you hear this description by David 3 years later, and it's like, well, We just couldn't get there from here. By the way, you're not allowed to see what we did, what we discovered, or how we made our decision. Does that feel like America to you? Does that feel like government to you that we do that? 303-696-1971. What must we do to get back in control of the judicial branch? And frankly, the rest of government too. I'll tell you about something that Ted Cruz come up with too. We'll have that conversation as well. George Brockler on the George Show, 710 KNUS. George Bracco right back with you, 710 KNUS. Thanks to David Migoya from the Denver Gazette. Super column from a super investigative reporter. But it frustrates me. I mentioned that before we got out of the last break here. I find myself at a place where I feel frustrated to the point where I don't know where to go from here. Like, we're going to have an incredibly left-leaning legislature try to craft some rules that make the judicial branch more accountable and more transparent. That doesn't make me feel good either, because it's the same party in power who killed off multiple attempts to expand the Colorado Open Records Act to include the judicial branch at the request of the judicial branch for years. I mean, Polly Lawrence, if you'll remember, representative from Douglas County, she brought forward 2 or 3 versions of that bill, trying to find one that the legislature and party line vote every single time. Joe Salazar and the lefty Dems over there would crush it every single time. So I'm not sure that I'm very confident that they're going to get it done here. And I know that there's a task force or a committee or whatever it is. Let's see. But hearing this is a problem. I'd love for them to incorporate into the legislation a mandate that all of the documents related to this current investigation that spawned all this stuff would be made publicly available. But in the absence of that, I find myself saying, well, then I want limits on these branches of government. Like, we have term limits for the state legislature. We have term limits for the governor, the secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer. We have none for judges, not a single one. We have an age limit that says 72 years. Frankly, that feels unconstitutional to me. How do you tell someone at 72 years you are incapable or unwelcome to do a certain job? I mean, it's not like they're a firefighter having to scramble up a set of ladders or something, carrying a body through something. These are folks that sit around to listen, they read, they write, tend to have really long lunches. But anyway, they do all this stuff. But you could do that at 72, 75, hell, maybe even 80. And with that kind of experience, expertise even, available, why limit it to 72? But here's where we might limit it, and that is term limits for judges. The idea that somebody can be appointed to the bench, by the way, with no input by you, there's no real confirmation process like there is for the United States Senate's role in confirming judicial appointees at the federal level, nothing like that. You could have someone who's appointed to the bench at 40, and they could serve for 32 years. One, that is an ungodly amount of para. That you're on the hook for that too. I'm on the hook for that. I'm a para guy, by the way. So this isn't me saying don't get any benefit from para. I hope to. Thank you, by the way, taxpayer. But 32 years of para, you're making gobs of money. The other thing is, are we that hard up for talent, for experience, for being a good judge, that we'd create a system that says, no, you can serve for decades. You're the branch of government where that matters. It doesn't matter to DA or AG or governor or legislature, but to judge, it super matters. Are they that different? Are they that special? I don't know. But then the timing is great, because some dude named Ted Cruz, who's apparently a Republican senator out of Texas, teamed up with some guy from South Carolina named Ralph. And they've offered an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to impose term limits on members of Congress. The amendment would limit senators to 2 6-year terms. That means 12 folks. And members of the House of Representatives to 3 2-year terms. That's only 6 years. And now it makes me wonder, why did they do it for just Congress? Why not do it for the Supreme Court too? Why not say, hey, U.S. Supreme Court, I know it's a coveted position. We want to free you up from as much political influence as possible in the making of your decisions. That's turned out to be really good, by the way. But we're going to limit you to 15 years or maybe 20 years. 20 years, 2 decades seems like a long time to be in one government office when the rest of the branches of government are all leaving at different times. So I like where his head is. But are you at a place where you want term limits, and not just for members of Congress, but for judges? It's interesting because the judge thing, as you know, we don't elect judges here. They are popularly approved, but there's no contests. You'd have to work really hard to know who your judges were other than names on a ballot. Even the Blue Book isn't very helpful in this regard. So in those circumstances where it's you versus no other opponent, two things I want to see happen. I want to see us increase the threshold to get retained in that position. How about 65%? How about just a supermajority? If you can run unopposed for an office, nobody's done the job while you're in the office. Nobody can challenge you for the office. If you can't get 2/3 of the vote, maybe that's a sign. But beyond that, maybe we say term limits for judges. I also think a lot about the term limits for members of Congress. And I know that seems like that is a growing and popular sort of cure-all for what's going on in Congress. I'm not sure that it is. And I'll tell you my biggest gripe with it. My biggest gripe with it is it deprives me of freedom of choice. It says to me as a voter, George, we can't trust you to vote for the person that'll represent you best because you keep voting for the same morons. So we're going to put a limit on how many times you can vote for a person. So they've limited my ability to vote for someone I want to represent me. And it's arbitrary. For Ted, it's just 2 or 3 2-year terms. And I don't know why it has to be more for a senator. Why not just 1 term for a senator? That'd be 6 years. Then there'd be parity. I don't know. I don't like it. Now, I think the term limits matters. Listen, as a guy who ran for DA, I was benefited by the fact there were term limits. We're the only state in the United States that has term limits for district attorneys. And I was elected only after the person that served 2 terms before me couldn't run anymore. Now, the questions come up, would you have run against her anyway? Yes, of course I would have. I don't know if I'd have won. Did pretty damn well the 4 years before as nobody with no money, but who knows? But from where I sit right now, it could benefit me if there were term limits for Congress. I mean, I'm a big Ken Buck fan. He's my congressman. But as long as Ken's in that seat, there ain't going to be no Republican running for that seat. Maybe somebody would be awesomer. I don't know. But I don't like the idea that the law might step in and say, no matter how much you like Ken, no matter how great a job Ken has done, you just simply can't be trusted to vote for him again. So we have to force you to vote for someone not him. That just doesn't feel like liberty, man. That just doesn't feel like America. But here it is. And we have it for so many other offices. Do you support term limits for members of Congress? Why? And should we extend it to members of the Supreme Court? Members of the Colorado bench? 303-696-1971. It's a conversation worth having. I don't have all the answers. I just got some opinions. I'd love to hear yours and talk with you about them. Give us a call, 303-696-1971. Joan, Nancy, everybody else on hold, I promise I'll get to you. Can I please do you a big favor? Can I tell you about some superstars named Drs. Richter and Snyder? They're dentists, but they do so much more, and they do it out of a fantastic, modern, new building down there at the corner of Stroh Ranch and Parker Road, right by Lehman Academy. And they do everything. In terms of family dentistry, this is the place you take your family. You take your mouth and all the mouths of the people that you care about. They're my dentist. I go down there because 1, I trust them. 2, they do a good job. 3, they put me at ease. I fell asleep twice in the chair. And 4, I like them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there are people out there who are brilliant tacticians when it comes to dentistry, but they're cold as ice, or they're not engaging, or they don't seem like I'm much more than just a mouth to work on. Not these guys. You'll love these guys. They're like normal neighborhood people who are out there trying to do a great job for the people that trust them. And I trust them. I think you ought to too. When you go out there, they got a great program that provides a whole bunch of dental services over the course of a year for a discounted price. Ask them about it. It's a great program. In fact, just call them right now, 303-841-7466, 303-841-7466. Said, hey, George told me about some special program you have. How special? And then you're going to reach out and go, dang, George, that's a special program. You can also check them at TwinAspenDentalCenter.com. That's TwinAspenDentalCenter.com. Let's cut away for a quick break. When we come back, we'll honor the callers and the texters. It's George Brock on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Brocco right back with you here, 710 KNUS. Phone lines are full, and I promise we're going to work through them. If we can't get through them all in this segment, we'll get to them at the top of the 9 because we love us, them, their callers. Joan, Nancy, and Alexa. I like that lineup. That sounds great. Joan, you're on 710. What do you think?
Well, I think that you've hit on a subject that women are interested in, fairness of the law.
So tell me, in what way?
I don't believe in term limits because we have no limitations on unelected public servants. And I think that your unelected public servant does much more damage than your elected anybody.
Well, okay, but is the answer to, hey, we can't stop the bureaucrats, then we ought to just have limitless terms for members of Congress? I mean, do you disagree with term limits for a governor here in Colorado?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think if we had not had term limits, that we might have had some Republican governors that were very decent.
How so?
You know,
give me an example.
Run for. Let's see. I don't know. That's hard to say because it's been such a long time since we had a Republican governor.
Yeah, Bill Owens was the last one.
Yeah, I know, and he was good, but I think once he was term limited out, you know, where do you go when you've been let go?
Well, I don't know what that means. Like, where do they go career-wise? I mean, he's had a pretty thriving career out there in the private sector. He's still engaged, very influential, but I'm not sure I care what happens to them after office.
Well, I can tell you that right now, that I actually filed with the Oversight Committee sits underneath the Supreme Court about a lawyer that I had a little dispute with, and they
was
were
his
like,
name
"Oh
Randy?"
no, you gotta."
No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm not. No, it wasn't. It was a lawyer that the city had hired, and they were supposed to hire somebody that wasn't related to the city, but this person was actually still listing in social media that she worked for the city. Kind of an interesting thing. It shows how close knit lawyers are and judges are. And I'm pretty sure you run into this with your stuff. You end up with some lawyers that when you get them, you go, whoopee, I got this lawyer. And they think like me, you know.
In terms of being DA or just in general? I mean, look, my greatest concern out here on the private sector side is going to some place, maybe it's Montrose, and getting hometowned. Do you know what I mean? Like, I ain't from there. Judge doesn't know me. Prosecutors don't know me. They're just out there doing their thing, and that I'm going to be the outsider dude who's brought in to try to get some outcome for a client, and they're like, who's this city slicker? You know? That's my biggest concern. Not that it's a tight-knit community. I'm not worried about that. I'm a little over the whole sycophantish thing where we have these annual judges dinners and stuff like that, where we fawn over them like they've somehow cured freaking legal cancer or something like that. They're just doing a job.
I think that's funny because some of the freshman congressmen aren't going to go to Biden's little tea party that welcome them.
Yeah, I get all that stuff. What do you think about term limits for judges, Joan?
I would rather see a limitation on how long they can serve. So,
how's that different?
Well, somebody who gets in when they're 40 and they serve 2 terms, then get out when they're 55 or something, and that's actually a very productive age period. I don't think that
But it would be, in your mind, it would be different if they started at 65. You'd say, well, then you can serve longer or shorter.
Shorter.
So when you get in means how the less time you have to serve. Geez, I don't know. How would you do that? Some kind of a sliding scale based on birthdays?
Yeah, maybe. Or they have pilots pilots have to retire at a certain age.
I'm not sure I agree with that either. And Joan, forgive me, you've been a great call, but once again, we have run out of time talking with you. But Nancy and Alexa, hear me. I'm making my word to you. And Frank, who's calling in now, I get you on the air if you hang on through the top of the hour for this last hour. That's what we do here. We do the talk radio thing, not the talk at you, talk with you. Be part of that conversation. Term limits for judges, term limits for Congress? No, I don't know. 303-696-1971. Let me know your thoughts. George Brock or George Show, 710. KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Brocco right back with you here on 710 KNUS. Continuing a conversation we started last hour. It really began with an interview with David Migoya from the Denver and Colorado Springs Gazette. You got to check out the article on what's now not going to happen regarding the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And it got us really talking about, how do we make government accountable to us? And the issue of term limits came up for even judges. I mean, we have the least transparent, least accessible, least accountable branch of government are the ones who can serve the longest. And that doesn't seem to make any sense in my teeny tiny little gray matter. And then you had Senator Ted Cruz offer up a constitutional amendment not to limit the terms for Supreme Court justices, which I don't know why, but to offer 2 terms for U.S. senators. That's 12 years because, they're super special. And by the way, he couldn't run for re-election if it happened. But only 6 years for members of the House, half as long, even though they have to run every 2 years. And the question really got going here. What are we doing with term limits? Are these the answer? Joan doesn't like them. Joan doesn't like them because bureaucrats have no term limits on them as well. And maybe that's something else. But I'm interested to get your feedback. Here's some text coming in. Term limits may cause Congress to become dangerously radical. Please tell me that that's meant to be ironic or sarcastic. What are you talking about? Congress is dangerously radical. Pelosi, love her, hate her, she was a bulwark to the squad. Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe you're saying it'd even be less stable. There was a time that the DA election was a break on this kind of political crap, but then the money started buying the offices. I would prefer campaign money limits. I appreciate the sentiment. I don't want campaign financing limits because you know who that favors? Rich people, the self-funder candidates like, I don't know, Jared Polis. That dude benefits from campaign finance limits. Limiting your and my ability to get our word out there and try to advance the cause for whatever issue or candidate we have, that can't be the answer. I'd rather have 100% transparency and know where every single penny came from, but every single penny gets to come. Here's one. Term limits for all judges or just Court of Appeals and Colorado Supreme Court? Great question. I'm open to the conversation, but in my mind, all of them. What do you think? Nancy, thanks for hanging on, Nancy. You're on 710 KNUS. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know about term limits. I'm not sure that we will get the true efficiency from our legislators with that because...
Are you looking for efficiency before we get there? Are you looking for efficiency out of Congress?
I'm looking for honesty and, I guess, honesty. You have legal services. You have legislative counsel. You have all these state employees and federal employees that are doing the work for the legislator. The ones that check to see if the legislation they're proposing is going to abide by the Constitution. And it's at their discretion. A lot of the new people, which we would have if we had term limits, are just getting their feet wet. There's a lot to learn in the legislative process. And they depend on these people to kind of lead them through the paces. So I don't believe that term limits is the answer. I think my vote is the term limit.
And what would you make the term limits and for which offices or all of them?
I don't know that I'd make it for any of them. If we're going to have it for one, we should have it for all. In other words, if we have it for the legislature, we should have it for judicial and the governor.
Well, we do. We have it for the legislature and the governor. The only people that don't have it so far are judges of any kind that I'm aware of and members of Congress. So if you were going to create term limits, would you apply them to judges? And here's why I ask. You made it sound like one of the problems is it takes a long time for people to figure out what they're doing in government. That's kind of an indictment of the system itself. And so we need to give them ample opportunity to learn on the job.
Well, that's what they're doing.
Do we want that? And how much time do you give them? If Nancy's going to term limit judges here in Colorado, what are those terms? How long can someone serve in a robe?
if I were imposing term limits, it would probably be 12 years.
Okay. And tell me how you came up with that number.
Well, it seems like a reasonable amount of time. I don't know. It's arbitrary.
It is arbitrary. It's an even number, and most terms in office are. It's a multiple of 4, which matters because many of our offices, especially at the state level, take place over 4-year terms. Same thing with DA. So it's not. I just didn't know if you had some magic to 12.
No, I don't. It would be for the U.S. Senate 2 6-year terms, and for
Congress 12 also.
And
or
6
House
and 6 2-year terms.
6
And
2-year terms.
Yes. Yeah,
Could you be elected into the Senate after doing 12 years in the House?
you could be.
Okay, interesting.
I wouldn't put a restriction on that.
How about for judges? 12 years for judges?
Yes.
And why 12 for judges?
For the same reason.
Well, 12 years is a long time. As you know, I imagine, you know what I'd love to know, and someone must keep track of this. What's the average amount of time a judge is on the bench that's sitting there right now? You know what I mean? Maybe we find out it's a lot less than we think. Maybe there's been a ton of turnover. How many years have people served on the bench before they've retired? Because, Nancy, the other thing that we never talk about here is there's a big, fat golden parachute called para for judges after they serve decades on the bench. And to give you an example, to achieve 50% of your highest average 3, you only have to serve 20 years, right? That 50% translates for a judge that's pulling down, let's call it $1.80 by the time they leave the bench. That means every year that they can get out of bed, they get 90,000 taxpayer dollars just for getting out of bed. That's a big incentive.
It certainly is.
And the 12-year limitation might limit that quite a bit. That might not be a bad thing.
That's true, yeah.
Nancy?
They probably bring the para retirement down to compensate for that.
Oh my God, I don't want to do that either. And Nancy, thank you for the conversation. You've really gotten us started here. Nancy's line is open, 303-696-1971. I think that you're going to hear some people. Let me take up the cause of the judges and some of these other folks. Well, if they can't serve long enough to get a meaningful retirement, why in the world would they ever leave their super milquetoasty practices in the private sector? Or why would they ever leave being a government attorney if they can't have the promise of serving on the bench for 20 years? I think it's a fair question, but the answer to it is, I don't care. If part of getting the best and the brightest is we have to lure them financially to come serve in government, maybe their head isn't in the right place. Maybe we don't want them to do the job. I got to say, I'm looking at the judges on the bench right now. One thing they all have in common is that you and I didn't pick them. The other thing they have in common, and I'm telling you, and I mean this as respectfully as possible, something happens when you put on the robe and you instantly begin to believe you are the smartest person in the room because somebody picked you to be a judge. And when you say stuff, it has the force of law. That ain't true for the DA, certainly not true for the public defender, not true for the police in that room. Something happens. And so I've heard this before too. I offered the idea that for judges, there ought to be a requirement that they serve X number of years in a career field like criminal or domestic relations before they get picked to be on that bench, and they should be pigeonholed in there. And you know, some judges said, well, how boring would that be, man? What if I want some variety? I'm like, okay, stay in private practice, man. The purpose of government isn't to entertain you and reward your political ambitions. It's for you to do a job, man. It's weird. It's weird. 303-696-1971. Nancy's line is open. Alexa, you're on 710. What do you think?
Hey, George, how are you?
As you can tell, I'm on the mend, but this is the kind of slow, lingering thing. I've never had this before.
It sucks, but can't wait for you to hit the high notes again.
Me too. I want to sing along with the me too, as you know. What do you think about all this?
So one of my concerns and again, maybe it's just appellate and Supreme Court, is would any of them, I know, shocked, be able to be, after hearing Dave Migoya, compromise? I kind of do like the Supreme Court people, I mean, obviously they can retire if they want to, but if they're on there, then they're not beholden to anybody when they retire, that they might have done a judgment one way or another. And that really concerns me, because we see it with our politicians all the time. And I'd like to think
that's interesting, Alexa.
It's political, but
that's an important aspect of this too. And that is, do we make them more corruptible, either overtly or just subconsciously, right? Because they're thinking to themselves, will this decision hamper my ability to go out and earn some other living? And I guess I don't want them thinking about the next job, although it seems like it's impossible to keep that from happening. But what do you do with this? How do you make this branch accountable to us?
No, I do think we need to make it accountable. And it should be just like we do in everything else in our lives. There should be rules and regulations that everybody has to follow. And with the Dave Migoya story, it's just astounding. Not only that they didn't have these rules, but common sense doesn't exist. I mean, a judge who has a interesting nickname, probably shouldn't be serving on the bench forever. I mean, someone should say, you know what, this isn't the right job for you if you're just exhibiting these behaviors, or if you're not able to let go of people or fire people because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they break the rules.
Do you feel
it's a concept
differently about Cruz's proposal for the Senate and the House than you do for the judges?
Yeah, I like his proposal. I do think our forefathers, when they envisioned our government, they envisioned that people would be going into these jobs part-time, not a career. And because it's now become a career and there's so much manipulation of people, that's one way we can stop it. Is by term limiting them.
Do you wonder why they didn't put one in themselves? I mean, they put limits for other things in there. I mean, terms of office and stuff, but not the number of terms. Why didn't they do it? And is that a sign of something?
Oh yeah, it's a huge sign of something. It's the same as some of the laws that they pass. They're not subject to. Why is that? They want to do COVID mandates for everybody. They want everybody to have, the Obamacare, Healthcare Act, all those things. They're not subject to it. That's insane. I mean, it'd be like a police commissioner saying, here's the laws of the county. I mean, I know that's not how it works, but here's the laws of the county. Everybody has to follow them but me. Would we say that's okay?
No, we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't. I worry, Alexa, because I trust your judgment with your vote. And what I worry about is you find a congressperson, man or woman, doesn't matter, that you really like.
Yeah.
And they're doing a great job. In fact, maybe everybody agrees, most effective member of Congress we've ever seen. But simply because they've been elected 3 times or whatever the magic number is, that's it. You're not allowed to vote for them again. You don't get to have that choice. You got to start over with some other boob. I mean, I worry about that as an infringement on my liberty.
I can see your point with that, and I understand it. How many octogenarians do we have in
my goodness, I know.
Congress? I mean, that, and so is there a happy medium? Is 18 years maybe the max?
That seems like a long time too. I mean,
that's a long time, but if you couldn't have done what you needed to do as a senator,
I agree.
Terms,
I agree. I also think that you and I are the ultimate term limiter. Like, we get to vote that way. Right. But if what we're looking for is something that is like more magnanimous, more noble, you got to look to Bob Schaefer. Remember, Bob says, hey, I'm running on term limits. I'm going to Congress. I'm going to serve, I think it was 3 terms, and I'm out. You know who else said the same thing at the same time? Guy named Tom Tancredo. One of them lived up to their word. The other one didn't. What do we do with that?
I'm not sure, but one of the things in the real world, business world, if you are a good leader, you are mentoring to find your replacement. Maybe that's what some of these people do who are very good. They should be mentoring and helping find a great candidate to replace them. I mean, if they truly care about their constituents, wouldn't you want to do that?
Happen. That's never.
I live in my fantasy world, George. So
I could get down with the term limits if only because whatever we've tried so far has been so ineffective to break that vice-like grip that incumbents have on these offices. But I'd want to do it like sunset it. You know what I mean? I'd want to try it and say, for 10 years, we're going to try this bad boy, and then we're going to come back and we're going to revisit it. And if we like it, by the way, I want to see just about every law sunset after a certain period of time. The fact that they live on in perpetuity until we undo it is stupid too. But I'd like to see us give something a try here. I think Ted Cruz offers this not because he really believes it, but because he wants to have it as a talking point. There's no chance this is going to pass.
You're correct. And, I think the saddest part is to realize that a large portion of the people who supposedly represent us don't really represent us. They're about power and money, and they will do anything to save their skin and to either make extra money. I mean, I still would like to see every congressperson, president's tax return while they're in office.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And
I'd
after,
like to see that.
And how about for the next 6 years after you leave office, we get to see what you make.
Oh, that's interesting too. Once you leave the public eye, we'd still have access?
Yeah, I think so, because some of these people, I mean, where did Alvis Brooks go? To some construction company or something? I mean, it's just really interesting where politicians end up in their career. And they're paid a heck of a lot of money to really just be the pretty face at the corporation. They don't really work. Many of them don't.
You were probably about to say Steve Foster, but I'm glad you didn't, because he could be listening. There's a chance.
He probably is. He probably is. No, he is the coolest guy.
He is the coolest dude. If we need more Steve Fosters. I'd love to see Steve Foster in Congress, by the way. That dude would make a little bit of a mess, but it would be great.
Don't put his poor wife through that.
Yeah, no, I don't think she would tolerate it or permit him. I'm just saying, Steve's the kind of guy I'd love to cut loose into that kind of a setting.
Oh, absolutely.
Might make him crazy, but I'd love to watch it happen. Just because
he would whip them into shape like no tomorrow.
I
Their
agree.
heads would be spinning.
Alexa, it's great to hear your voice. Thanks for listening to mine.
Hear you.
Maybe we'll see you at Perry's. I don't know. I don't think Amanda's going back there, but who knows, man. Hey, listen, Alexa's line is open, 303-696-1971. Frank, I promise I'll get to you and the other callers that are calling in right now and some of the texts. This term limits thing, do you want it? Isn't it infringement on your right? Or are you like, I don't care anymore? We have got to have a change. I am so butt sore over Congress and the judicial branch. If the only way we can get control is to limit how long someone can serve there, so be it. 303-696-1971. Before we cut away, I got to remind you about somebody, a superstar in his own right. This is a guy, by the way, I don't think he can make it in Congress, because this guy's all about customer service. He's not about feathering his own nest. He's about feathering your nest by upgrading the countertops in your kitchen and in your bathroom. Yep, that's right. I'm talking about the Mitch Floria. Super Coloradan, super American. Got that business out there called The Art of Granite, even though it does so much more. It's kind of a hidden gem. They do granite, quartz, marble, fill in the blank, and you can find out about all of it just by getting in your car and driving for like 17 minutes, I think, from almost anywhere to the corner of about I-76th Avenue, Colfax area. And when you go in there, you see the showroom, you get to talk to the folks that work for Mitch, and you fall in love with the idea that, man, this is a small business. It's kind of become a big deal here, but they still treat me like I'm just, another neighbor. That's the kind of business they give you. Let me tell you this. They're so invested in this community, the you and me community, that if you mention you listen to this show right here, KNUS, you get 20% off of labor for January. Or you get the kitchen or bathroom sink for free with the purchase of any countertop package. The guy that does that is the guy that's invested in you, not just maximizing the number of dollars he can get from you, but making you happy. Give him a call, 303-386-5919, 303-386-5919. That's theartofgranite.com, theartofgranite with a T.com. When we come back, Frank, everybody else to text, George Brockler on the George Show, 710 KNUS. Little STP, Stone Temple Pilots on 710 KNUS. We had someone poke their head in from across the hall to say how much they enjoyed the phone call that we received from our Alexa. There it is. Alexa, congratulations. You probably know who that fan is. Now, I want to get back to the phone lines and to the texts that are coming in here about these term limits. And it really grew out of the discussion we had with Dave Migoya about the Supreme Court and what can we do about it. But here's one. Hello, for discussing term limits. I think that I would like to see is start reducing or removing some of the privileges that come with longevity, because that is what is throwing everything off. People that have been there forever get numerous power and perk types of advantage. If we made it more level, that serving was serving, not a ticket to the penthouse office, and power in the committees, I think that would help a lot. Well, it's true that longevity gets you seniority and placement on those committees. That part is true. And you probably get more pay. I don't know what the other perks are. I know in Congress, there's jockeying for offices. Like some people want to be in the Rayburn or the Longworth or the whatever these office buildings are. And I do remember once sitting down to meet with Diana DeGette. And keep in mind that over the course of my lifetime, I believe there have been 2 members of Congress from Denver, Pat Schroeder and Diana DeGette. And that's it. And that's sad. That's sad. Can't point to something big Diana's done, but she's been there a long time. But I sat in her office. It was for a meeting on something, doing it in my role as prosecutor. And I remember she came in and she has this ridiculous view of the Capitol Dome itself. It's like the one you would see in a TV show like Scandal or something. I remember she came in, she was just beaming ear to ear. She said, "Great view, huh?" And everyone that was in the meeting was like, yeah, it's a cool view. She goes, "It took me 20 years to get that view." And I thought, oh my God, what an indictment of this crappy system. That if you stick around long enough, you get a better view of the Capitol. Like, I don't like term limits because it keeps me from voting for who I want. And I don't like that. But I could be convinced. Frank, convince me. You're on 710 KNUS. What do you think?
Hey, George. I don't really fundamentally like the idea of term limits, and it's just on account of it's a governor to try to protect us from ourselves, and I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go. I don't like it for judges or for anybody in Congress, and the reason I really don't like it for judges is because I think it takes them a while to figure out where the bathrooms are. I mean, it's not. It's
how horrifying is that, man?
Thing.
How many decisions do we say, well, it's OJT, buddy, it's on the job training? They're still figuring it out. It's called the 5th Amendment, not the 6th. I mean, how long do we tolerate that? Should we even tolerate it?
I get, I don't know. My impression is that it does take a while because a lot of times these judges that are appointed, at least state-wise, I mean, for district court level, they don't have experience in other areas that they're just, handling cases.
Horrifying.
So it takes them a while
you
to
just
figure
horrified
that
me,
stuff out.
Frank. You horrified me.
Well, I mean, George, look, I'm not speaking out of school here, but a lot of the appointees are just either public defenders or DAs. And so they have good criminal experience, but they don't know anything civilly. They don't know anything domestically. I mean, it's not. And so you got to kind of pick that up as you go, and so it's a little tricky. I mean, that's a little tricky, but I think that they become good judges. I think that, I think there's got to be a way to figure out, besides just retention votes, how to get rid of the bad actors anyway. I know out in Jeffco, there's a lady who, she just had no temperament for the job whatsoever. And she finally got non-retained, but it took a lot of work. And, I think about on a federal level, I mean, Nottingham, for God's sake, the guy, he might have at one point been a decent human being, but he grew out of it. I mean, he was a horrible person. He shouldn't have been.
He was rough to be in front of. That was the universal word, man. He was rough to be in front of.
Oh, he was an awful person. I mean, I don't know if you ever had a chance to be in front of him.
Nope.
He was an absolute. I mean, he was horrible, and he didn't, and it wasn't. It was
and by the way,
horrible for
those guys have
mistakes.
lifetime
It
tenure.
wasn't.
Those guys have more than what our
they're on the
judges at the
bench
state
forever.
level have. They can serve until they leave feet first.
Well, unless you're Nottingham and you're caught.
Well,
running
there's
bills,
that.
Strip
There's
clubs
that.
and prostitutes.
Frank, do you feel like
And you
though
just
that same analysis of, hey, we got to give them a chance to figure out the system should apply to other members of government in not having term limits, like governor or AG?
I don't know what you do though, George, because look, what's happened like on a state level with term limits and things. I don't know many people down there who do work other than legislative who think the term limits has been a really great thing down at the state house. But but you also can't. I mean, I don't know. There's been at least one person who I've had to deal with here and there, but she got elected to Congress nationally just recently, but she never figured it out. She never knew. I mean, she was known as the vacuous hair flipper, and she never did figure out.
Boy, with a description like that, it could be anybody, and yet I think I know who you're talking about.
No, I bet you have an idea who I'm talking about.
I feel like I might. This thing with the judges, though, and I'm
routinely,
and I'm because you're in a position to know, I want to have this conversation. I don't want the excuse for longevity to be, hey, they needed some time to figure it all out. And if the reason for that is because we're putting them in positions in which they don't have expertise, it seems like the easy answer is to say, stop putting them there. Like there are people that get appointed to the bench that have been in domestic relations their whole lives or have been just some highfalutin civil firm lawyers. They make the absolute worst judges on the planet Earth. For trial judges, give me public defenders and DAs all day long because they know the game, right? They know this works.
They're in front of courts
all the time, and they know,
and
they know the jive, right? When you come in and say, "Oh, judge, I couldn't get this discovery because of this," or they know the game, and they're like, "You're full of it." When you put these other folks in there, one, they have no perspective. The game takes place at a speed they're not prepared for. It's not like moot court when they were in law school. That's one, and the other part is when it comes to issuing sentences. They have no perspective. Give me a public defender or a DA all the time, because some of these guys show up and they're like, this is the worst case I've ever heard. And some dude gets crushed with decades in prison, whereas a DA or a public defender would be like, it's kind of middle of the pack. You know what I mean? It's just not that bad in the scheme of things.
I do agree with you 100% on that, because you do need somebody who just goes to court. I mean, whether they're doing one thing or another. And that's why a DA and a PD get a little bit of a better nod, because, and I don't disagree with it necessarily, because they are in court. But I mean, you got to have somebody who doesn't need to Google Maps where the frickin' courts are. I mean,
or to look up hearsay. Do you know what I mean? Or to look up 404B evidence and be like, oh, other acts. Got it. I mean, you need someone who can shift on the fly. And we don't get that a lot. And so maybe the change we need to make is, in addition to considering the term limits thing, is, hey, if you've been in domestic relations your career, we love you as a domestic relations attorney. Like if you put me, if I were ever to get appointed, my God, by the governor to be a judge, and they put me in domestic relations, woe to the people who appear in front of me, because that's like taking a dude who spent his whole life doing orthopedics and somehow sticking him in something and saying, talk to me about infectious diseases. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know this stuff.
Well, you know how I think, because Denver rotates those guys, kind of from division to division every couple years. And I would be, it's tough. I'm like you. I'd be, if I got stuck doing domestic relations, I'd have to, I barely got a gentleman's B out of that course in law school.
That's right.
So, I'd have to relearn things from the very
But here's where it gets really weird, Frank, is that if somebody walked into your practice and said, I have a big time complicated divorce, would you represent me? You would be ethically bound to say, I can't. Right? Like I'd have to refer you because and yet if a governor makes you a judge, you can then sit in and make decisions about that same case. How does that make any sense?
It doesn't. It just doesn't. I don't know how you, and I don't know how you do it. I guess you are heavily reliant on how people handle their business in the first place. I mean, are judges willing to get up to speed on something that they're not that comfortable with? I would hope so. Hopefully you're appointing people who have enough conscience to do that. But who knows? I mean, I don't know. It seems to me mostly a lot of these appointments are kind of demographically
anymore.
too, which,
anymore.
yeah,
I just,
which
and
is
again,
just not,
the
that's
problem
frustrating,
is
it's not right.
the problem is that those judges, whether they're good at their jobs, not good, smart, not smart, and of course that's got to be the presumption, right? Everyone that puts on the robe, you have to treat like they know what they're doing. It doesn't matter because their decisions carry the same force of law with the same huge consequences for your client, whether that client's the people or a defendant or someone in a domestic case. It's a system that I think we have just up to this point, because it goes so unscrutinized and unchecked. We've said, no, this thing works great. This thing works great.
Yeah.
I think if we really treated these offices and the scrutiny of who got into them like we did the other offices we put people into, I think we'd come up with a different product. I hope the product's better, but it would certainly be one that you and I had a better understanding of. Because right now, short of being an attorney, and people are texting in here, a couple of people, too many lawyers and politics and all this, nothing about the law should be as complicated as it is. And yet, that's kind of why you and I have jobs.
Yeah, and you have these legislators that are elected. They think that their primary goal is to get more laws on the books, and actually, I think it should be probably the other side of it. Like, let's get rid of some of the obscure, arcane things that are on the books. Let's get rid of that. That would be as big an aid to anybody as getting something passed.
They're doing that in Aurora, by the way, at a small scale level.
Are
the Aurora City Council has something called, I think it's called a regulatory roundup. And I think Dustin Zvonik is spearheading this group, but they're going through and asking members of the community and businesses, tell us which ones of these laws that we have are onerous, ineffective, just suck. And they're going and undoing them. Like, where is that approach to government? I want that approach to government. I mean, the idea that you pass something anyway, man, I could go on and on forever. Frank, thanks for the call. We got Bill on the line. I promise I'll get to you, Bill. Another thought here. This would be like making a professor the attorney general of an entire state. Who would do that? It turns out the majority of voters twice. Anyway, listen, before we cut away, and we'll come back and get Bill and whoever's calling in on Frank's line at 303-696-1971. I got to tell you, right now is the perfect time to start planning for the post-tax season. That's right. We're in the tax season right now. We've got till April the 15th. Some of us extend longer. I've done it before. And you're trying to, I think I'm going to get something back. This is going to be one of those good years. I don't think the economy's going the direction I thought it was. I'm looking very, very optimistic at the future. One of the things that you can do, one of the things you should do, is to take some of that largesse, some of that profit, if you will, and invest it in someone that you love. And the best way to do that is to go to our friends, Littleton Jewelry. You don't just support Littleton Jewelry because they put out unique, unmatched, legacy quality heirloom pieces for the people that you love the most. That's not the only reason you go. You go there because Jesse is a family guy who took a family business and has blown it up. And that's what we're about here. No knock on the national guys. No knock at all. But if you're looking to support a local business that puts out a product that's better than the national chains, you got to go to our friend Jesse at Littleton Jewelry. Now, you can check them out online, littletonfinejewelry.com. littletonfinejewelry.com. But you are cheating yourself out of an experience that will leave you with a smile on your face and the idea that, you know what? Colorado's going to be okay. We're going to do okay with folks like Jesse and his family running that shop. And you get in that car, you drive out there, go south to Hudson Gardens. Hey, sometimes you're just in the area. You go to Hudson Gardens, think to yourself, I'm going to stop in and see Jesse. I'm going to turn right at the jewelry repair sign. I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, what's the coolest thing you could do when it comes to jewelry? And of course, they can buy and sell the gold and silver, the platinum, all this stuff. But the custom jewelry is where they are just so distinctive and so unique. Reach out to them. You can go check them out on the website, but reach out to them in person and go check it out. You're going to be happy that you did. That's littletonfinejewelry.com, littletonfinejewelry.com. When we come back, Bill, John, the other folks calling in. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. Knopfler at all right here on 710 KNUS. Again, always interesting to listen to the podcast because all of this music is gone from it. And so here I am making these pronouncements about which bumper music we have. And it's always weird because it comes in silent. And there I am saying, hey, it's Stone Temple Pilots. Nobody knows that my son listens to this show. Nobody knows. 303-696-1971. Hey, before we get to the phone lines here, and Bill and John, I'm going to get you on. I just want to say thank you, and you'll know who you are, for the toe warmers and the little hand warmers that a wonderful listener sent to us in recognition, I think, of my carping and whining about the fact that we are working in an ice box many, many mornings. The temperature on the wall, of course, completely fake. I think it's there to trick us. It's probably gaslighting, if that's the right use of that term. And it's incredibly cold. So now I've got these toe warmers. I'm holding up right in front of the camera right now. If you're on the YouTube channel, and if you're not, what's wrong with you, man? Go out there, Google it, subscribe, like it, watch it, love it, share it with your friends. And so thank you. Thank you for the toe warmers. That is very, very generous. We also accept gold bullion. Bill, you're on 710 KNUS. What do you think, Bill?
Morning, good. Yeah. I remember Tancredo making the comment when he went, I think, 5 terms instead of his promised 3, because he said that seniority is much more important than he realized. Okay. And I think other people, Jeff Flake, made that same comment. After 6 years in Congress, you're still a backbencher. So he felt that it was unfair to his constituents that he would, be replaced by someone who would go further to the back of the line. And I've also spoken to a state senator here in Colorado who is going to be turned out after next year, and who told me the same thing, that he was in favor of 8 years, but he found that it was too short. So I had a thought of, if you're familiar with in the NFL, they have this thing called a franchise tag where they can take a player and say, the normal rules don't apply to you. We're going to be able to hang on to you a little bit here. And so a similar thing where each party, say each election cycle, would get to choose 2 members who would otherwise be turned and say, okay, we're going to give you a franchise tag and let you run again. And if the voters want you, you'll be returned and you'll be a senior person who can then, guide or mentor or whatever, the more junior members in the legislature.
Well, so does that mean no term limits because of that, or you want term limits?
No, everybody else would be term limited because the voters have said they wanted that. And I think most people seem to think it's working well here at the state level. But you would be able to keep what he called.
You would have to find somebody that would say that out loud, because the term limits here, if you talk to folks that have been over there in the Capitol, it has created such dysfunction, such tribalism, and such a lack of institutional knowledge, which you've touched upon, that we revisit issues that we had debated and put to bed 5-10 years ago because nobody has a memory.
Right. I think most voters think it's working well. Okay, the pros up there on the Capitol Hill, they don't have that same opinion. That's why it had to be passed by a voter initiative, because the legislature never do it. So what this does is it lets you keep term limits for most people, but the parties would get to choose every election, say 2 people in the House, 2 people in the Senate. So you'd have 4 total between the 2 major parties who would be able to, exceed the normal term limits. If the voters return them, they could get the tag and then be voted out in November. But this way you would keep some elements of the institutional knowledge while still, for the most part, keeping people term limited. And the people who really like being there would probably work extra hard to, so when they can be term limited, they might be a strong candidate to win that franchise tag and stay on further on.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Good thoughts, Bill. I appreciate that. Thanks for keeping them going. Let's get to John on 2. John, you have a couple minutes with us. What do you think about what Bill said, or your own thoughts on the term limits thing, man?
Well, George, I think, and this goes back to a discussion that you had a few minutes ago before the break, that when you've got someone in a position like a judge position that is coming in and really doesn't have the experience in that field of the law, such as going from domestic to criminal or things like that, I would recommend that they apply something to what I do in my profession. I'm an instructor of commercial pilots, and I train other instructors. We don't let them come in and teach and sign somebody off and say they're safe to go until they've been observing somebody who's an expert in that field. And then they go, all right, now I understand the nuances of this new position I'm in. I think a judge should have to shadow another judge in that career field until they're signed off to judge cases that are not part of their expertise.
Well, forgive me, I had to cough button myself there right as you were finishing up. What's the fix? What's the fix that gets us there is there a federal fix that's different than the state fix, or is it the same approach to judges across the board?
Well, I do think those positions need to have a better filter and a mechanism for sake of a better term, flushing out the people that really don't need to be or belong there, or that aren't the best choice for the public.
I wish we had a system here in
whatever.
Colorado that vetted our judges more like the judges we see vetted at the U.S. Senate level. I'm not saying it's a flawless system, but I'd love to see some questioning of these people by legislators. Like, just because some group from the community said, we like these three, and a governor said, I like this one best, there needs to be some other check on that, John. I don't know if it's coming, but I sure hope it is. Hey, sir, thank you for hanging on. Thank you for the thoughts on this thing. We are just about out of time here. I don't know how 4 hours went by so quickly, but it did. My thanks to Josh Sharf from the Independence Institute. Take a listen to that in the 7 o'clock hour. David Migoya, super investigative reporter for the Denver Gazette. His piece as well, and you for making this return so nice. I won't be back tomorrow. It's John Caldera, but I will be back on Monday. I'm not going to Jordan. I'm just going to court, people. Cross your fingers for no warrant. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.